Kelly Free was raised to believe that good and bad things happened in threes. When something bad happened, then another would soon follow, and then the third one. If a fourth thing happened in a short period of time, then two more would soon happen. For good things, it was seldom in threes, but old wives' tales are just that. Old wives' tales. Kelly did believe in the theory of threes for bad things. The first bad thing happened late in the afternoon. He worked for a property management group in a fairly large community in Missouri. He had worked there since before meeting his bride of 6 years, the former Megan Flowers. He was very successful at finding commercial property for various uses and made good commissions. His boss, Jerry Myers, though, was always disapproving of Kelly's outlook on his personal lifestyle. While the other members of the sales or consulting team lived large with their commissions, Kelly saved most of his commissions and lived off his salary. The other team members drove Mercedes and Lexus automobiles and SUVs. Kelly drove a 10-year-old 1/2-ton pickup. All of the other team members lived in gated communities and million-dollar houses, but Kelly and Megan lived in a nice 2-story home with 3 bedrooms in a nice area in town. Most of the other team members belonged to area country clubs, but Kelly belonged to the local YMCA and did his workouts there. Every performance review that Jerry did on Kelly ended with the admonition that Kelly needed to get with the program and live more like his contemporaries. Kelly would lean back and just smile at Jerry. He would nod and say he would do better and then go back to his lifestyle. He had plans for retirement and wanted the maximum amount of money for it. On this fateful Friday afternoon, Jerry was on a tear. He called each of his sales team into his office one at a time. It wasn't long before the office grapevine was buzzing. With the recent economic downturn, businesses weren't looking to expand and were actually laying off workers. This gave property management services sales team less work. When it was Kelly's turn in the office, Jerry was short and to the point. "I have to make a hard decision here. We have to trim costs, and right now, I have to lay off some of the office staff and some of the sales team. Right now, the most money coming in will be from the rental properties that we manage, and you, and the rest of the sales team, have nothing to do with that end of the business. Tell me why I should keep you over the rest of the team." Kelly pointed out his success at finding properties for specialized purposes and the amount of business he had been still bringing in during these early days of the downturn. Jerry acknowledged his contribution, but pointed out that Kelly's savings could keep him going longer in this high unemployment time than his coworkers who had less savings. Kelly sat there in complete amazement. "Since I save money by not blowing it on the newest and biggest gadgets, houses and cars, I should be let go over some of these others who will lose their toys regardless of whether they stay employed since their commissions are going to be less? Are you for real?" Jerry started to get very red in the face. He was at least 100 pounds overweight, and rumor had it that he refused to take medicine for high blood pressure. He looked like he could have a stroke at any minute. "Damn it, I told you, and told you to live up to the wages you make. You are an embarrassment when we go to close on a sale. These movers and shakers in the large corporations that we deal with aren't impressed by you when they come to town to close the deal. You look and dress like some small-town hick instead of someone of their level of sophistication. It's a wonder we don't lose sales because of you instead of closing on the properties that you find." He wiped the slobber from his mouth and continued, "I have feelings for you all, and I feel badly that I have to lay off anyone, but to put someone else into bankruptcy while you can afford to be out of work for a little while is something I can't do. Clean out your desk." Kelly stood up as tall as his 5'9" would allow. His parents had always preached having savings, and now it would pay off in the long run. With 8 years of savings and dividends from investments, he had close to $3 million in reserves, while he knew most of his coworkers had only a few thousand saved. He didn't actually need to work again if he didn't want to. He just liked his job of searching out properties for companies no matter where he had to go to do so. He was used to large corporations coming in and asking for the impossible, namely the finding of large properties for the least amount of money. He didn't even say goodbye to Jerry as he left. He went immediately to his cubicle and started to clean it out. There wasn't much of his personal stuff there. The computer belonged to the company. He smiled to himself about the work he was leaving. He signed on and saved his last proposal for a large shipping company to his personal drive, and then removed all evidence of the proposal. Jerry didn't know the shipping company had contacted him personally to look for land for a new distribution center. He would have brought the proposal directly to Jerry before the closing, something he had been doing more and more recently as his name was getting well known around the country as the man to see for property. He didn't do anything vindictive such as erase all of his other work. Others might do that, but he was a better man than that. Soon he was packed and going out the door. None of his coworkers even looked up as he left. "Oh, well," he thought, "I have always been the outsider." He wished them well, but had the feeling the company would not survive if this economic situation continued for long. He threw his stuff into the back of his trusty old pickup and set off for home. He needed to sit down with Megan and discuss what they would do for income. He didn't want to hit any savings until necessary. As he drove, he went over his list of good and bad. On the positive side, their house payment was low as they had purchased the home when interest rates were at their almost lowest in recent history. He could cut out the YMCA membership if necessary and just jog to stay in shape. A cheap set of weights would suffice for the rest of his normal workouts. Kelly already mowed his own yard and maintained the landscaping. He had resisted Megan's wishes to have a backyard pond and all the additional work and expense that would entail. But he also did most of the grocery shopping and the housework, letting Megan concentrate on her job and career. He felt it was what the modern woman wanted to see in her man: help around the house and not defining male or female roles in their relationship. It took a lot of extra time, but Megan always seemed to appreciate his efforts to help out. Megan had a good job with a local printing company. There was little chance for her to be laid off. She could jog with him to stay in shape. They hadn't decided to start their family yet, so insurance needs were minimal. In fact, this might be a good time to get her pregnant, at least from the side of making love at the drop of a hat while he was unemployed. He smiled at the thought of extra lovemaking in his future. There had been too many times when he had been traveling that they had missed their normal conjugal interludes. Their vehicles were paid off, so only maintenance was needed for them. His pickup was older but in good mechanical shape. Megan's car was only 5 years old, but they had just made the last payments on it, and it had been chosen for its low maintenance costs. Megan could also put him on her insurance if needed, and if she got pregnant, the baby would be covered. As a matter of fact, this whole economic downturn might be the impetus to go out on his own and be a freelancer for a while. He was actually smiling as he pulled into their driveway, but there was a vehicle preventing him from accessing his side of the garage. He stopped and looked at it for a moment, then realization dawned on him. Their close friends, Mary and Mark Brooks, had traded their old car a few weeks ago, and Kelly hadn't gotten used to their newer car. Since they, or at least Mary, were visiting, he would have to put off telling Megan about his loss of a job. He got out and grabbed the box with his stuff and started into the house. It was early spring here in Missouri, so the temperatures were in the 50s during the day, if the sun was shining, but today was kind of a raw day, so he didn't think he would find his lovely blonde wife sitting with their guests out on the back patio, but he was surprised when he didn't see them in the living room or the kitchen. There was no basement since the soil was pretty rocky in this area. He was slightly concerned. He sat the box on the table and headed upstairs to the bedroom area. At the top of the stairs, he started to hear soft moans. He trusted Megan so implicitly and would bet his soul on her fidelity that he refused to consider anything wrong until he stopped in the opening to their master bedroom. Bad thing number 2 awaited him in his own bedroom. In less time than it takes to describe here, many jumbled thoughts went through his brain. He remembered meeting Megan at a party thrown by mutual friends 8 or 9 years ago. He was drawn to her blonde hair, blue eyes, and fantastic smile. The fact that she was vivacious and outgoing in contrast to his more quiet demeanor also drew him out. Her body was lithe and toned with a heart-shaped rear and long and lean legs. They had hit it off and started dating the next night. Both were in their mid-20s when they met. They had learned that jumping straight into bed might not be the best way to progress a relationship, so they had gotten to know each other very well before doing the dirty deed. That didn't mean that they didn't neck and pet and get each other worked up many times before finally coming to the conclusion that they were meant for each other. When they had consummated their relationship with sex, it was though they had never experienced sex before. To be in love and totally committed to each other was the extra needed to make sex into true lovemaking. They had never regretted it since, until today. Now Kelly was looking at his now former close friend Mark Brooks, a brown-haired, 6-foot-tall male screwing both of them. Kelly and Megan had discussed fantasies many times during their foreplay, but he had always thought of them as just that, fantasies, and not something to pursue. He always felt he just needed Megan and no one else. Obviously, she didn't have the same feelings. He didn't know how long he was standing there, frozen, until Mary opened her eyes after screaming with pleasure. His thoughts were still swirling around his brain. He didn't know what to do. Should he scream out and attack, fall to the floor crying, puke his guts out, turn and run, or all of the above? So he remained frozen in place, but noted that Mary didn't seem surprised, appalled, or upset that he had caught them. Instead, she smiled at him and lifted a hand to beckon him closer. He didn't move. Mary then tapped Megan on the head. "Kelly is here." That was all she said. Megan immediately turned to Kelly. His confusion became even more pronounced as Megan greeted him with, "Hi, dear. We're glad you got here in time." Mark looked around at Kelly, gave him a shit-eating grin. He got off the bed. He didn't seem at all pissed that Kelly had interrupted his sex. Megan immediately got up, and Kelly noticed she was covered in hickeys and bite marks. "We're so happy that you were here." Mary and Mark and I have been trying to wait for you to start, but we couldn't wait, so we started without you, but now you get to join us. Kelly was having problems processing what she was saying. When had she come to the conclusion that he wanted to swing? What comment had he ever made, even in the heat of sexual frenzy, that suggested that he wanted to screw Mary while Megan screwed Mark? And what would lead them to believe he would be home so early this particular day? That last unspoken question really threw him. As Mark and Megan came closer, Kelly stepped back out of the doorway into the hall. Megan was still talking. "This is going to be so fantastic, all of us having sex with each other. Isn't this great?" Kelly backed down the hall further as they kept coming. Megan reached out and grabbed Kelly's hands. "Baby, come back in the bedroom and join us. We got a quick start, but I think you will catch up quickly." Kelly shook his head. His hands were limp in her grasp. He looked down past the multiple marks on her body to look at their hands. He had to do something, and quickly, but his brain was in a fog. Losing his job and coming home to find his wife screwing their friends was almost too much to bear. He shook his head. Finally, he stuttered a bit and managed to speak. I need to go. I need to get something. Please." He pulled his hands away from the woman he had intended to spend his life with. "Please, wait here while I get something I need." Megan looked up at him. She was concerned immediately. There was something wrong, but she was in a sexual thrall, so she didn't comprehend that Kelly was not a willing participant. Mark tried to reach out and take Kelly's hand, but Kelly shook him off. "No, wait here. Let me get something I need right now." Later they would realize that he never said he would return. Kelly backed down to the stairs and turned and went down to the kitchen. He paused for a few moments to try and figure out what he should do. Finally, he went into the small office off the living room and grabbed his tablet, his laptop, chargers, and his phone, and then went out to his pickup. He sat in the driver's seat for a few moments before putting the key into the ignition switch. Somehow he knew that when he started the truck up that a chapter in his life would actually be over. His truck was not quiet, so when he fired the engine, he had better be ready to drive away. There could be no hesitation. He put his head against the steering wheel for a moment before making his decision to leave and allow some time before making any final plans. He turned the key and the engine caught immediately. He looked over at the front door as he put the transmission into reverse, and he wasn't surprised to see the door immediately pop open and Megan come running out in her robe. Kelly didn't slow down or stop. He backed out into the street and dropped the transmission into drive and headed away. As he glanced into the left-hand mirror, he could see that Megan had come all the way out to the street in her attempt to keep him in their former home. He looked forward again. He couldn't dwell on this right now. He drove aimlessly around the city for quite a while before finding himself headed west out of the city on a 4-lane highway. What the hell, he thought. I might as well just drive. While driving, he could put off any real decision. But the driving didn't stop him from thinking and remembering. He remembered how he felt when he started to date Megan. The feelings were strong that this was the one that he wanted for his wife and the mother of his children. He loved her smile, her hair, her eyes, her height, just a little less than his own at 5'6" tall. They also had great conversations about politics, religion, children, and whatever topical event that was going on at the time. They shared so many traits. Megan had picked out their house even though she knew that Kelly could afford a more opulent lifestyle. She agreed on his saving as much as possible. She had never seemed discontented with their life until today. He couldn't think of any comment, sign, or behavior that would have given him any clue as to her behavior today. His driving was on autopilot for hours as he proceeded west into Kansas. He never made any conscious decision until his low fuel light came on and the alarm started beeping. He looked around and didn't see anything he recognized. Lord, he must have driven farther than he was familiar with. An exit came up and there was the sign for a familiar truck stop franchise, so he exited and headed for the fuel pumps. Unfortunately, he had to prepay. Right at the moment, he didn't want to leave a paper trail, but this one time might be okay. Megan wouldn't be able to track him from here very easily. He used his card and then went inside and hit the restroom before grabbing a coffee and a snack and heading out to his pickup again. Since he didn't want Megan tracking him further west, he decided to drive north on the 2-lane highway headed that direction. An hour and a half later, he was crossing the Nebraska border and still headed north. Somewhere north in the middle of the state, his subconscious must have taken over as he took a left and headed northwest again. At about 4 a.m., his fuel light came on again and the alarm started dinging. He was near a small town, so he pulled over to take a rest. He had to have been driving 10 or 12 hours but didn't seem sleepy, just disconnected. He looked around. The town was too small to have an all-night convenience store. The only traffic seemed to be railroad and the rare semi-truck hauling cattle. He saw the name, Hyannis, on a sign. For some reason it seemed familiar, but it took a while to recognize the name from a summer vacation with his parents when he was 12 or 13. They had come through this area called the Sandhills of Nebraska. He remembered that though the rolling hills were green at the time, it had seemed stark and lifeless to him. His dad had tried to tell him about the area, but it had just seemed boring at the time. Now here he was again. Why? He didn't know. Somehow he was now here. He had shut off the engine when he rolled into town, but it was now getting a little chilly in the steel cabin. He started the engine to warm up, but after a few minutes there was a loud noise from under the hood, and the air immediately cooled. The battery indicator also showed something was amiss, so he shut the engine down. Bad news number 3. Kelly looked and found an old jacket from last year's hunting expedition down in the Ozarks behind the seat. It would help keep him warm. Occasionally he would get out of the truck and walk around. The night was clear and cold. The stars were brilliant in the overhead skies. It was hard to believe it was the same sky he could see from his house in Missouri. Take away the light pollution, and it was amazing what you could see. Despite the jacket and getting out and moving around, morning found Kelly shivering in his pickup. The sun came up and a few signs of life were seen on the short streets of the small Nebraska town. Kelly could see a cafe down the block, so he made his way there. Luckily, it was open to serve breakfast to the early risers. He ordered coffee along with ham and eggs. The coffee went a long ways to getting his body warmed, and the ham and eggs would help fuel the fires to keep him going. After he ate, he inquired about someone who could look at his only possession, his pickup. The helpful waitress told him that her boyfriend ran a repair shop and would be happy to check out his truck. She made a quick call and then directed him over a street to the repair shop. Kelly made the quick walk and discussed the need for repairs. Soon a tow truck was sent to retrieve the truck. The only problem was that Kelly only had $100 on his person. Actually less because of the snacks so many hours ago and the breakfast this morning. He didn't want to use his credit card or anything that might leave a paper trail for Megan to follow him, if she actually gave a damn to find him. He wanted space and time to think through her cheating and the reasons. He would go back and talk with her when he was ready and not a moment before. He asked and was directed to a bank another block down. There he talked to the manager for a few moments and then sat down with his laptop and accessed the public wireless internet. Soon he had transferred some of his money to a new account at the local bank. It should be enough to fix his truck. While he was there, he turned on his cell phone. He was in the habit of shutting it off when he left work, as Jerry was prone to call and harass his employees at all hours. It went through its startup routine, and then the message indicator showed he had multiple text messages. A quick check showed them to be mostly from Megan and a few from Mark. Some of the later ones were from his mother. He assumed that Megan had contacted her with some kind of concocted story in hopes that he had contacted her or his dad. He sent a quick reply to his mom that Megan and he had a falling out and he was taking some time out to think things through. Kelly also let his mom know he was okay, but stranded a long way from home. He would call when he could. Kelly then called his attorney. Since it was a Saturday, of course, he wasn't in the office. The answering service picked up. Kelly left a message for Lawrence Roberts, his attorney. The message contained the facts that Megan and he were estranged, and that she was to have no access to any of his accounts until a judge decided differently. He also wanted Lawrence to move all monies as possible to offshore accounts. An hour later, Kelly received an email reply from Lawrence Roberts. He expressed dismay at the fact that Megan and Kelly were not together, but he promised to do as Kelly asked as long as it was legal to do so. He knew of a couple of financial guys who had the right experience. Kelly also asked Lawrence to make arrangements for $2,000 per month to be transferred from his accounts to Megan's accounts to help with monthly bills, including the house payment. He wasn't going to live there anymore, but she needed a place to stay. But he had another problem. He assumed that Megan would be looking for him. Too much activity in his accounts in the next few days would give her a place to look, and his pickup was out of service for those few days. He needed a job that would give him money for expenses, but keep him off the grid for a while. He returned to the diner for lunch and mulled over the possibilities. There was no large city nearby in which to lose himself. He could camp, but it was still freezing at night. Besides that, the purchases necessary to outfit himself would require money and would leave a trail. He could hitchhike away, but he wanted to have his pickup. He didn't want to buy something else right now either. Besides, that also necessitated cash movement. Now he wished he had stayed in his home city for 24 hours and had gotten a significant amount of cash before cutting and running. Finally, he asked the waitress about any jobs in Hyannis. She gave a little laugh. "Honey, there ain't but a few businesses here, and there won't be any new jobs in town until late spring. If you want a job, you need to hit up the ranchers. They are always needing help." He shrugged his shoulders. "I don't have any skills they might need, or I would check that out. Are you sure that no one is hiring here in town?" She shook her head. "Look, hon, I can understand when you get stranded that you can get a little addled. I am sorry. There just isn't anything for a few more weeks. She left him then to attend to another customer. He sat and pondered his options. Finally, he admitted defeat. If he hitchhiked even to the small city of North Platte, he wouldn't be able to lose himself in its population of 25,000. Strangers were strangers and stuck out, just not as much as here in Hyannis. Even if he managed to get some kind of job there, it wouldn't pay much, and he was sure rent was a real issue as well as other issues such as food to eat. He might not be able to afford to come back and get his truck. The waitress, whose name tag said Tiffany, came back and refilled his coffee. Look, Tiffany, I have been thinking. Do you think that a ranch would hire me on until I can get my feet under me? Well, sugar, you look like you are in decent shape. If you are willing to duck your head and really try hard, I know of a few ranches that would give you a shot. The pay is shitty even by my standards, but they put you up and provide your meals. I don't know how to ride a horse. I mean, I haven't tried to ride since I was a kid, and that was on a dude ranch in Wyoming where I am sure the horses were especially gentle. Sug, they use pickups and four-wheelers more now. As a matter of fact, some of the ranches don't even have a horse on the property. She looked around the small cafe. She then smiled and pointed over at an overweight man at the other end of the room. Look, that's Bill Blaze. He owns the Circle Bar X out north of town. Let me check and see if he needs any help right now. He should be calving, and that means a lot of sleepless nights unless he has enough help. Kelly nodded his permission. As she left to fill Mr. Blaze's coffee mug and have some words with him, Kelly was thinking about a book he read as a teen. It was a Zane Grey novel called The Dude Ranger, in which a tenderfoot from the East had come to the wild and woolly West to seek his fortune. The times were a lot harder then than now, but the tenderfoot had accepted the challenge to adapt and learn and became a top hand and finally earned the respect of the original Westerners. Kelly started to believe that if he kept trying hard enough, he could adapt and learn. After all, these were far more modern times. He would just have to keep control of his temper and accept any challenge. He remembered that in the book, the Westerners had tried many tricks and sometimes outright attempts to harm the hero before he gained their respect. He would have to be ready for some of the same here if he got a job. Tiffany made her way back and let him know that Mr. Blaze would like to talk with him. Kelly nodded and made his way over to the rancher. As he approached, he tried to read the man. Bill Blaze was a large man. He must have been almost 300 pounds of well-fed weight on a 6-foot-tall frame. His hair was thinning but still brown, and he had piercing brown eyes. He had a permanent squint to his eyes. Obviously, he did not believe in sunglasses. Sit down, young man, please sit. Kelly took the offered seat across from the rancher. They sized each other up for a moment. Bill Blaze appeared to be about 60 years of age. He wore plain but serviceable clothing and had an open and honest face. His hands seemed a little arthritic, but were rough and calloused. This was a man who was used to hard work. Bill was looking at a man in his mid-30s with sandy-colored hair and blue eyes. Not overly tall at 5 foot 9 inches compared to Bill's own 72 inches in height. This stranger was not overweight, but also didn't seem all that muscular. He had the thought that this must be some kind of city dude, and not one who was used to hard physical work. He reached across the table and shook this stranger's hand. My name is Bill Blaze and I own a ranch about 10 miles north of town. What is your name, son? Kelly introduced himself. He had no reason to keep his name hidden. While well known in the real estate circles, Bill would have no reason to know his name or reputation. Also, Megan had no idea where to start looking for him, should she be so inclined. The two men talked for a bit. Bill described his ranch to his acquaintance, and Kelly just stated he had been in real estate until the economic downturn had forced a change. Bill nodded at that comment. Yeah, I guess there are good times and bad just like in ranching. Cattle prices are flat right now, just enough to keep me hanging on, but not enough to make the banker any happier. I ranch about 15,000 acres. We keep the grass in shape by moving herds from one pasture to another. Here in the Sandhills, we have great grass and plenty of groundwater and small natural lakes, but if the grass gets ate down too much, then it takes years before it comes back and the sand blows away. We are calving right now and expect a good increase in the herd, but it is a lot of work. I have a couple of hands at the home place and one at a cabin on another place about 12 miles west of here. Kelly was surprised at the size of the ranch, but Bill casually waved his hand to dismiss his incredulous look. That is not unusual up here in the Sandhills. It takes a lot of acres of grass to raise a cow here. We have plenty of rain early on, but not much in late summer. It gets pretty dry. I also have extra acres of grass, so I can hay it off in the early summer. That way we can feed or supplement the grass in the late summer and all winter. Bill sat back and assessed Kelly. Tiff says you are looking for a job. What do you think you can do for me? Kelly knew he had to be honest with the man. I just left my wife in Missouri after finding her in bed with her best friend and her best friend's husband. Somehow she thought that I was just going to go along with the whole damn thing. I need to do something to pay the bills so I don't leave a paper trail while my lawyer works to get things settled. As far as what I can do for you, I am open to anything. I haven't ridden a horse in forever, but I can learn. I follow orders until I learn and then can contribute my thoughts. I am not against physical labor. As a matter of fact, that is probably just what I need right now, good physical labor while I decide what to do with the rest of my life. Bill was a good judge of men. He was also used to people who needed a change in their lifestyle. Every year at branding time, city dwellers would hear about roundups and branding, and quite a few would come out to the sandhills to try and experience a little slice of ranch life. They were all green, of course, but willing to do whatever needed done. It was usually a great time with just a rare few who complained about how hard a life it was. He forced his bulk out of the chair, and Kelly also rose. Bill extended his hand, and they shook. "Do you have a ride to the ranch, or are you hoofing it?" Kelly flushed a little. "My pickup is in the shop over on the next block, so I am hoofing it, I guess." Bill chuckled and slapped him on the back. "That's all right, son. We'll get you situated at the home place, and then make plans to reunite you with your truck when it's fixed." They went out and got into Bill's large four-wheel drive truck and detoured to the repair shop for Kelly to get his gear. They also stopped at the small farm or ranch store so Kelly could buy at least a couple of sets of clothing more suited for manual labor than the clothes he had on. Kelly knew the ranch was about 10 miles north of town, but it took a good half hour to get to the ranch house and buildings. The turnoff was 10 miles north of town, but then that turned onto a single-lane asphalt road that went 5 or 6 miles east off the highway. Bill explained that his ranch butted up against the highway, but the ranch house was centrally located. There were multiple pickups, tractors with loaders, ATVs, commonly called four-wheelers, and a couple of ute EVs or side-by-side seating ATVs in the area between the buildings. There were a couple of barns, one for hay and one for a few of the cows, a large shop, and some smaller buildings for machinery. The ranch house was a large, older two-story affair where Bill and his wife, Connie, lived. They had no children and were now in their 60s. Bill let Kelly know that he was going to ranch for as long as possible and then maybe sell and move into a larger town, like North Platte, when he could no longer physically care for himself or Connie. There was also a large double-wide house about 100 yards from the main ranch house. Bill pointed this out as the bunkhouse. Kelly had almost expected a cabin with just a large room and an outhouse out back for the hands. Bill laughed when Kelly expressed his musings. "Well, I guess a lot of people still think we are living like that old TV show, Green Acres. It is a bit funny since we have hot and cold running water, have had for ages, and with satellite, get to keep up with the outside world and have for a lot of years now." They stopped at the bunkhouse and Kelly pulled out his stuff. Bill asked about more clothing. Kelly shrugged and said he would just make do for now. "We'll have to organize a trip to North Platte or Alliance for supplies in a few days and pick up some clothes that will work for physical labor for you, if you find you need any. Those larger towns have a much greater selection of clothing for any need." Kelly just nodded. Any comment right now might seem derogatory after his comments about how rustic he had envisioned the ranch should look. Bill stopped before showing him around the bunkhouse. "We never talked about pay. I don't know how much you need to earn, but my standard pay is $2,000 a month. You get free housing and food. There is a fully equipped kitchen here, and I keep separate freezers for each man. You will have your own key to keep any foodstuff secured. Unfortunately, I employed a couple of guys a while back who seemed to think that everyone's snacks or specialty foods were theirs, and it caused quite a few problems until we set up individual refrigerators, freezers, and pantries." He stopped and showed Kelly his assigned pantry and freezer. "You can buy and keep soft drinks, alcohol, or whatever here and in that fridge over there. Here are your keys. I provide the beef, pork, chicken, and turkey. If you don't know how to cook, there is a computer over there on the counter that can access any recipe in the world. There is Wi-Fi here also. The password is located on the side of the monitor." He took Kelly into the hallway. "This first room is David Turney's. He likes to be called Butch. Each bedroom has its own bathroom, and there is a common one here in the hallway. This second room is Terry Lockins. He likes to be called Haas. I have no reason why, actually. And this last room is yours." Kelly was surprised at how spacious the room was. There was a double bed, dresser, and a small desk and comfortable chair. There was also a flat-screen TV on the wall along with a DVD player and the box for the satellite unit. The bathroom was spacious with a full tub and shower and vanity, large enough to store those personal needs items. Kelly dropped his bag on the bed. They went back into the hallway and Bill showed Kelly the linen closet where extra bed linens and blankets were stored. Towels and washcloths were also kept there. "I figure you will have your own soap and shampoo, so I don't try to provide those." Kelly nodded. He would have to make do until he could get to town and grab that kind of personal care items. He certainly hadn't tried to grab some as he left home. When he said as much to Bill, his new employer snapped his fingers. "Say, we can help you. Connie has been wanting to go to Alliance. That is a bigger town to the west about 70 miles from here. She has a sister there, and they have some shopping available. Why don't you make up a list of what you need today, and she will pick it up and be back here tonight." Kelly quickly wrote out a list of his immediate needs and gave it to Bill. Bill then took Kelly to the main house and introduced him to Connie, his wife. Connie was also in her 60s and was a typical mature-bodied woman, matronly with a pleasant smile and outlook on life. She also didn't like sunglasses and so had the typical wrinkles around her eyes, both from her sunny outlook on life and squinting in bright sunlight. Her hair was shoulder-length and gray. She was welcoming and quite happy to pick up some items for Kelly. Bill then introduced Kelly to Butch and Haas. Since Kelly was from Missouri, Butch immediately started calling him Missouri. Kelly quickly decided that Missouri was a better nickname than Show Me, which also would have denoted where he was from. Kelly guessed that proper names weren't necessary for ranch work. He shrugged his shoulders as Butch immediately started to teach him. They grabbed a UTV and headed out to the nearest pasture. Butch explained as they drove that the majority of the herd was sequestered here for the winter where the hands could watch the cows easier and be ready to assist with any calves. He showed Missouri the big round bales of prairie hay that were kept near the pasture. Since the cows had been fed early this morning, they would not be fed again until about 6 p.m. Butch did start to point out which cows appear to be fresh and ready to drop calves. There were 5 to 10 new calves each time the men went out to check them. At night, it was more dangerous as coyotes would come in closer to the herd and try to grab a newborn. The cowboys worked hard to make sure that the cows and calves were protected as much as possible. Butch showed Missouri the rifle that they used to keep the coyotes at bay when necessary. Some of the ranches send guys out to eradicate all coyotes and other predators, like bobcats, but Bill just wants them controlled and kept away from the herd. Thus, the rifle was a .223 caliber, not big enough for deer and other game animals, but high-powered enough for coyotes. They circled the herd a couple of times before going off over a low rise so Missouri could shoot the rifle a few times. Since he had grown up with weapons, his marksmanship was good enough for Butch. Kelly told himself that he would apply for a permit and get a handgun the first time he went to a town big enough to have a gun shop. It might be Alliance or Ogallala or even North Platte, but he felt a handgun might be useful when around the herd. Butch informed him about prairie rattlesnakes, but the weather recently was still pretty cold for them to have left their dens for the summer. It was unusual for anyone to get bit, but it was still a possibility and just something to watch for. Boots were next on Missouri's list of needed items. They came back through the herd on the way to the ranch and found a cow in the midst of delivering a calf. Butch stopped at a nice distance and Missouri witnessed the wonder of a new life coming into the world. Butch talked about how ranchers and farmers were the first conservationists and most were environmentally aware as their livelihoods depended on making sure that the land and its occupants were healthy at all times. Bill Blaze actually kept some horses for herd watching and fence riding to reduce his carbon footprint. When they went to help with haying, they would also find a few ranchers who still stacked hay with horsepower rather than gas power. After the calf was born, Butch made sure it was ear-tagged with a match to its mother. He also gave it a quick shot of vitamins and an antibiotic to reduce its chance of getting pneumonia. The wet and cool weather could play havoc with a newborn's ability to fight disease. They had to carefully watch the cow as she was very protective of her newborn. By moving slow and speaking softly, they were able to put the UTV between them and the cow as they worked. Sometimes the little one is too weak for a bit, so we gather it in the back of the side-by-side or drape him on the back of the ATV and we slowly move him to the barn. We want his mama to come with him, and once we get the baby into the barn we dry it and then get mama in there to help so he can nurse. Usually we only have them in the barn for about a day before the calf is strong enough to be out in the elements. This calf looked strong and ready to be with his mama. As a matter of fact, he, a young bull, immediately walked on shaky legs around the UTV and started to butt his mama and then nurse. Butch gave out a satisfied chuckle and said, "That's the thing we look for right away. Human or bovine, the need to nurse is paramount and shows how strong the baby is." With his recent difficulties with Megan, Kelly decided he was not destined in the near future to see how human mothers and babies interacted this way shortly after birth. He was pleased at what he had seen but saddened about what he was again contemplating. Butch kept Kelly busy, showing him the various pieces of equipment needed for a ranch of this size. There were no assigned vehicles for each man to use. It usually came down to what was needed and closest at hand in the choice. Thus, every vehicle had keys in them. Butch cautioned Kelly about that. You automatically take out the keys and lock the doors in the city, but here you could condemn a man to be exposed to high heat or extreme cold. Or what if you lock him out of a vehicle? Even when we brand or hay in large groups, no one takes the keys out of their vehicles. It is not unusual for someone to just grab the nearest pickup to go and get something needed. We all trust each other to bring it back in the same condition as it left. Kelly made the mental note to break that habit of removing keys as he got out of vehicles. He could understand the need to keep from getting too hot or too cold from exposure. Butch also gave Kelly an extra coat. Someone left a couple of coats and jackets here when they left. You can use any that you need, especially at night while it's cold outside. We will go out at 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock to check the cows. Haas will go out at 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock to do the same. We don't expect it to get down to freezing tonight, but there is a chance of rain, and that will make you miserable if you don't have something waterproof. He paused. Do you have a hat? Kelly, aka Missouri, shook his head. Butch cocked his head in disbelief, and then sorted through the closet and found a floppy hat with a 3-inch brim. Here, you might want to wash this before wearing it, but it will keep most of the moisture off you tonight. Missouri had noticed the full-size washer and dryer at the bunkhouse and decided to wash the cap, coat, and his current clothes as they were the clothes he had on when he worked last. Oh my gosh, he thought. I was laid off yesterday, drove all night, and have a new job today. He shook his head in amazement. Butch and Haas showed him how to run the pickup with a bale lift on the flatbed. They backed up to a bale and used the arms to grab the bale at about its center and lifted it up hydraulically. Butch laughed and said that he could remember having to grab small square bales by hand and load a trailer and then take them out to the cows and break each bale open so it could be scattered. Now they showed Missouri how the bale was then let down from the back of the pickup, and then they just drove around as the bale rolled behind them and left hay in a wide trail for the cows. They went around and around until the bale was gone. Then they had to go and grab another bale for the bulls. The bulls were kept away from the cows until it was time to start breeding again. Bill had a dozen bulls and traded a few off every couple of years to reduce the chance of inbreeding. He exclusively bred Angus bulls to Angus cows, but occasionally he would buy just some black white-faced cows and some red Angus cows just to change up the herd for a bit. He always kept Angus bulls though. 3 months or so after calving was done, the bulls would be turned out into the cows again. At the end of the following month, Missouri would be taught how to preg-check the cows. Any cows not pregnant would be loaded up and sold. A few heifers from this year's crop would be kept back for next year. This continual process maximized the production of the herd by weeding out the cows that could no longer produce. Some of them actually made their way to the Blaze's freezers as fresh meat. Those would be sorted from the herd and fed corn for a few weeks before going off to the meat locker for processing. This gave the meat its marbling and made it more tender. Bill would then bring the fresh meat back to the house for aging before freezing. Missouri was to learn that this made the meat extremely tender and tasteful. Missouri was now on knowledge overload. This whole process was so different from his old life that it was like a different world, full of different priorities and morals. These people were trusting to a fault. It was obvious that it was still a very physical environment, but labor-saving devices were evident everywhere he looked. Butch gave him a break and offered to share his food supply until Connie got back from Alliance. Bill expected her before dark or soon after dark, but it depended on how long her visit with her sister lasted. Missouri thanked Butch and then decided to prepare a meal for them both. He had been accustomed to cooking at least 3 to 4 nights a week, depending on Megan's and his schedule. Now as he worked to fix sloppy joes and macaroni and cheese, he wondered how often Megan was actually working late or just screwing her friends, the Brooks. Then he had the wild thought. Were the Brooks her only lovers? God, what an idiot I am, he thought. After their supper, Butch immediately cleared the table, and all of the dirty dishes went into the dishwasher, and soon accompanied by Haas's dishes. Missouri put the clothes into the dryer, and they all three were done for the evening. Missouri retired to his new bedroom and made the bed. He then worked on the last real estate proposal and attempted to make a few phone calls, but was dismayed to find that there was very little signal on the ranch. The nearest tower was probably at Hyannis. He went outside and got enough signal to make a few phone calls in the cold evening air. The contact at the business he was doing the real estate search for was not happy at getting such a late call, but understood when Kelly explained his recent job change. They worked out a few details before Kelly hung up and went back inside to warm up. Kelly then looked at his phone and found multiple messages from Megan and missed phone calls. He deleted them all without looking other than to note she was worried about him. Yeah, right, he told himself. She just wants to know where I am so she can get something done. He wasn't ready to deal with her yet. The funds he was having deposited from his savings account would keep the house payments and most of the utilities be paid on time. Megan could buy her own groceries. Hell, maybe she was taking this opportunity to move her lovers into the house. They could cohabitate and save money that way. The Brooks leased an apartment as Mark had always detested home ownership. He worked the new requirements into the proposal and then set the alarm for 1:30 in the morning. He was going out with Butch at 2 o'clock and then with Haas at 5 o'clock. As he gained experience in birthing calves, he would start to take his turn checking during the day and night. Butch wanted him to help pull a few calves first though. Missouri found out that pulling calves was needed sometimes when a cow got too tired trying to calve or the calf was breech. Sometimes the calf came out with a leg first. This was the worst case scenario as the calf sometimes had to be killed and then dismembered to protect the cow. It was part of the learning experience to start to see when a cow was getting into distress early enough to help turn the calf before birth to reduce the chance of problems. The older cows tended to have fewer birth complications, except for maybe a prolapsed uterus. The UTV carried a surgical repair kit for those problems. That cow would then be noted for culling from the herd later. As luck would have it, Missouri got to help Butch pull his first calf that night. It was surreal. The shadows caused by the cow were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Butch had a headlamp on, but Missouri only had a flashlight and couldn't hold on to it and the calf puller at the same time. The cable had to be put around the calf's hips to reduce how much tension was put on an extremity. Butch informed him that it was not unusual to dislocate the hip or even pull off a leg. Care had to be used. It was hard to do as the cow was not cooperating. They were lucky this night. The calf pulled out straight and true and was soon standing and trying to get to its mother. The cow got back up and ate her cleanings, that is the placenta and umbilical cord, while Butch directed Missouri to tag and inoculate the newborn. They found a couple of other newborns and quickly moved between the mama and calf and got them tagged and inoculated. They headed back in and turned over the UTV to Haas as he readied himself for the first time out this cold but dry night. Missouri fell into bed and slept like a log until 4:30 when his next alarm went off. He dragged himself out of bed and bundled up again. It was about 30 degrees outside with a brisk breeze. He was to find out that sandhillers didn't really think about wind until it was greater than 20 miles per hour. Anything less than that was just a breeze. Straight winds sometimes got up to gale force at 60 to 70 miles an hour. The spring also brought tornado season, and the early warning system didn't work that well in this sparsely populated territory. Haas and he pulled another calf. This one was stillborn. They picked it up along with the placenta and took it back to the house for disposal. They could hear the coyotes yipping in the distance. They got a couple of hours sleep before making a quick breakfast and then feeding the cows and making another check for calves. This became the daily routine for the rest of the month until almost every cow had dropped her calf. The days became a little milder and the rains came and the grass greened up. Now started the fence riding. Missouri learned how to saddle a horse and then climb on. Most of the horses were trained well enough not to buck, but a couple would crow hop and try to show the rider who was boss. He hit the ground hard a couple of times, but soon learned he had to get right back on. He learned how to tighten the cinch so that the horse could still breathe, but the saddle wouldn't fall off. He also learned to not put his boot clear into the stirrup, so if he was coming off the horse he could get his feet clear. Being drugged by an out-of-control horse was not a way he wanted to die. Every day they fed the cows, then saddled up and rode the fences looking for sagging or broken barbed wire. Since the cows had not been put out to the bigger pasture yet, he noted the breaks, and they would come back with a pickup or UTV to patch the holes, replace a post, or put up new wire destroyed by the winter cold and wind. Heavy snow also accounted for some fence loss and then needed repairs. Whenever time permitted, both Butch and Haas worked with Missouri to develop his roping skills. It was a long process. Missouri had first to get a real loop in his lariat. It kept wanting to figure eight on him. Butch told him that if they had any horned animals that the figure eight might work, but Angus calves didn't have any horns, so a regular loop was needed. He practiced making his loop and then swinging it over his head. After he mastered that, it was time to throw the loop. There was a calf head, artificial of course, mounted on a bucket that served as the target. Missouri threw from behind, from in front, and from the side. Occasionally he actually got a loop on the head. Most of the time he failed. Then he had to pull the lariat back, wind it up again, and then make his loop and throw again. His arm was sore by the time practice was called to a halt by his teachers, or maybe tormentors. By the end of April, the fences all looked good and tight again, ready for the cows and calves to be let out. Missouri was getting better at roping, but it was decided he would be better suited to throwing calves instead of trying to rope them when it came to branding. Their ranch was slated to host the branding in the middle of May. First, they would have to go to other area ranches and help with branding there. Missouri's pickup was fixed, but he decided to store it in town for the time being. He really didn't need it at the ranch, and it could be stored inside ready for him when he needed it. Just about that time, Bill came and asked to speak with Missouri privately. "Kelly, I just wanted to tell you that your wife will soon know just about where you are. The state patrol noticed your pickup in town and started to ask questions. Apparently someone in your family, presumably your wife, reported you missing. There is a new initiative, kind of like an Amber Alert, for adults, just to check on their whereabouts and let family know. Kelly just nodded his head in understanding. As much as he hated to think of it, right now his old life was about to rise up and bite him on the butt. The patrol is checking with people in the area. Since you didn't make any attempt to hide who you are, they are not banging down my door yet, but they will be coming by soon to check on your well-being. You don't have to leave or even change anything, but I am curious to know why you are here and not talking with any of your family. Kelly began cautiously and then spoke more confidently about his former job, his wife, way of life, and his outlook on spending and then her cheating. Look at it from my standpoint. Here I was just laid off from a job I loved because I had savings and lived within my means. I cleaned out my desk and went home to try and get my bearings and try and decide how I was going to proceed. I have many clients who would probably use me as a freelancer, or I could start my own business, but did I want to do this now, in this economic environment? Then I walk into my house and find out my wife is not only a 304, but also wanting me to immediately jump in and join her. She even felt I would embrace this kind of sex at the same time. Here I was, already reeling, and the woman I wanted to have children. I just had to leave before I lost everything. God only knows what might have happened should I have stayed. He looked up at his boss. Bill had the look of a concerned parent on his face. It was full of compassion. Kelly continued. I drove around the city that first afternoon after escaping their clutches, but couldn't think about anything concrete. It was just a jumbled mess. My boss couldn't have crashed my world better if he had planned it. Finally, I must have just gotten on the freeway headed west and just continued. If I was moving, I didn't have to stop and feel. I could just keep moving away from the problem. Once I know what to do, I can go back and deal with this whole mess, but I still don't know what to do. I have savings. My lawyer got a good man to move the bulk of it to offshore accounts where my wife cannot get to them. Infidelity is no longer a valid reason to divorce and keep most of the money that I have accumulated over the years. She would get at least half, and I don't want her to profit from her shitty behavior. Kelly took a deep breath and leaned back in the chair. There were tears in his eyes. He looked off into space. This place and this job were a godsend. I almost wish I could pay you for the therapy you and the boys have provided for me. This work at the ranch has been the best therapy I could imagine. I am learning a whole new way of life and feeling better than I have for years. I sleep deeply at night because I am physically tired instead of being mentally exhausted. He shook his head. I know I can't hide from her forever, but I did wish it would be a while longer. Actually, I am surprised she is even looking for me. She has the house, her job, her lovers, just not me. All in all, there isn't any good reason to even search for me unless she wants the savings. The cars were paid for and the house is almost paid off. I directed my attorney to deposit $2,000 a month into her account to help maintain her lifestyle. She doesn't need me at all. Bill then leaned forward. What is your plan if she shows up here? Of course, I could have her arrested for trespassing, but shouldn't you talk to her and tell her it is over, if it is? Kelly shrugged his shoulders. I don't know yet. I haven't decided. In the evenings before I crawl into bed, I sit and try to decide what to do. I know this is a temporary job, not a career. I don't see myself ever owning a ranch. I might become an investor in the right operation, but not an owner or manager. I really don't know what my future looks like except lonely and bleak. He took a deep breath and let it out as a sigh. Right now I can't talk to her. Someday soon, yes, I will be ready to talk, but not now. Bill nodded his head. Okay, this is how I will proceed. The patrol will show up in a couple of days to talk with you. In town, they really didn't know where you went, but that you were still in the area. We are a close community, and you have been accepted. Believe it or not, there has been a lot of speculation about your history. After all, you dropped in with your Missouri-plated pickup, had a meal at the cafe, and then disappeared except for the pickup. Butch and Haas don't know much about you, and probably don't even remember your real name. If they talk, it's about Missouri, not Kelly. Most of the people would put two and two together, but they won't volunteer the information to cops, except the sheriff, and he doesn't care as long as no laws are broken. He leaned back again. If someone from your past shows up, I will try and give you a heads up on the radio. You know that the business band radio reaches pretty much anywhere on the ranch. It will be up to you on how fast you respond back here. Kelly thanked Bill and headed back to his task. As surely as the sun comes up in the east, a few days later, a lone state patrolman showed up on the ranch. Bill called Kelly to come to the ranch house for a talk. Kelly met the patrolman and assured him that he was fine. The patrolman lectured Kelly on the need to keep family informed about his whereabouts so that they would not worry and involve law enforcement. Kelly managed to not smile as he assured the patrolman that he would take care of that oversight. Missouri now started to plan. His pickup would be watched, that he was sure. He had no wish to see Megan right now. He had the rare thought, what if she brought Mark and Mary with her when she came looking? Absolutely, he would not talk to her with those a-holes present. Where to go and how to accomplish it were his main thoughts. He could definitely buy a new vehicle if he desired, but as soon as he registered it, someone could start to track it. He went back to Bill and made a couple of arrangements with him after outlining his plan for the immediate future. Bill was surprised, but then got a smile on his face and agreed. The basics were then discussed. Kelly used some money from his personal account, one that had been set up after he left home, to order supplies. About a week later, the brown truck started to make regular stops at the ranch. A small pile was accumulating in Missouri's room. Every evening, Missouri would go through the latest shipment and repack the panniers he had purchased. He got his handgun permit and used a rare trip to Alliance to purchase a semi-automatic .45 pistol and a couple of 100 rounds of ammo. He also purchased a .223 rifle and scabbard for coyotes. A couple of 100 rounds for it were also added to his overall supplies. They started branding. It was hot, dirty, smoky, smelly work. The good hands would rope the calves out of the herd and drag them to the crew, throwing the calves on the ground. There were 2 people to each calf. One would grab the calf and throw in on its side, and then kneel on its neck and hold the front hooves. The other one, usually Missouri, would then grab one hind leg and pull back while pushing the other hind leg forward with his foot. This helped hold the calf still while additional hormones and antibiotics were administered. Then the brand applied to the right flank. If it was a young bull, then he would be castrated and made into a steer before being let up to rejoin the herd. Early in the day, the calves had been separated from the cows. The cows were bellowing in the other enclosure, and the calves were bawling for their mamas. There was a break for lunch, provided by the ranch wives, before continuing all afternoon. On a couple of large ranches, the whole group would be relocated to another herd, and the process started all over again. Missouri would sleep on the way back to the Circle Bar X and then eat a light meal before showering and throwing his clothes into the washer. There was no thought about Megan or any of his other worldly problems before falling into a deep sleep, only to be awakened before daybreak to head to the next ranch and repeat the day. There were calves who fought and kicked. Their hooves hurt and caused great bruises. More than one person was limping at the end of the day. Missouri took solace in the fact he wasn't the only one hurting. Occasionally, they would find a steer or heifer that had escaped notice before. These were not thrown on the ground. A portable cradle would be used, and the miscreant then shoved into the cradle. The sides squeezed the beef, and the head was locked into the headgate so the animal couldn't move. The appropriate bar could be moved down and out of the way to allow branding, then the animal was released. Some ranches wanted to use calf cradles to hold the calves, but the process of branding was slowed, so most still just roped and threw the calves. As they moved from ranch to ranch, the calves were getting bigger. They were putting on weight every day as they grew. It took more and more finesse and strength to throw the calves. Missouri didn't realize it, but he was growing stronger every day from the sheer physicality of his work. He was leaner in size but heavier with muscle. His hat had been replaced with an 8-inch brim to shade his face as much as possible, but he still was becoming more and more brown. Some hands wore sunblock, but it wore off pretty quickly. Finally, branding was over. All of the hands took a needed couple of days to rest and recuperate. It was time for haying to start. All of the tractors, sickle mowers, swathers, rakes, balers, and loaders were ready to go. The mowers and swathers would start up as soon as the dew was off the hay. If a mower was used, then a day later the rake would be brought in and the hay windrowed. The swather left the hay in a windrow, but sometimes the windrow would have to be turned over if the hay got wet and didn't cure fully, so a rake might be used to turn the windrow. Again, it was hot, dusty, dry work. The old adage of making hay while the sun shines is not a false statement. Some of the tractors had air-conditioned cabs, but most were old but serviceable open-platform tractors with none of the modern conveniences. High school kids were hired to help run the mowers and rakes. Older crew ran the swathers and the balers and loaders. Some hay was put up in large haystacks and some was baled in the large bales. It depended on the rancher and his preference. Missouri started out with the high schoolers on the sickle mower tractor. Then he learned how to use the 20-foot wide rake to pick up the loose hay and move it to the center into a nice windrow for the baler to pick up and make into tight 2-ton bales with plastic wrap to protect the hay. Soon the meadows were dotted by the large round bales. On a couple of ranches, the bales were large square bales affectionately called loaves by the owners. These were easier to stack than the round bales, but all would later have to be moved to the bale yards where they would be handy for the upcoming winter. It was hard to think that while sweating out pounds of water every day that this was work to prepare for winter. Arriving back at the ranch one evening, Bill came to the bunkhouse to talk to Missouri. "Connie had some visitors today. That was the bombshell that Missouri was dreading. 4 me. Bill nodded. How many came? Bill held up his fingers. 3, 2 women and a man. Only one introduced herself. She claims to be your wife and wanted us to immediately get you back here. Connie informed her that you were working on another ranch today and wouldn't be back for a couple of days. She figured that your wife wouldn't question your sleeping arrangements. He stopped and looked intently at Missouri. Are you going to go through with your plans? Missouri nodded. Yep, I figure I will be off your land before she comes back. If she doesn't know which direction I leave, she will figure I will go for my pickup and will watch for me there. With any luck, I will stay away long enough for her to go home and leave me be. Bill jumped on his comment. Do you mean her home or your home? Missouri smiled a little sad smile. Until today, this was my home. I guess I now fit the epitome of homeless. There are still a couple of hours of daylight left, so I had better get going. He shook hands with his boss, also someone he could call a friend. He didn't say anything to Butch or Haas. Bill would take care of that tomorrow. He quickly stripped his bed and threw the bedding into the washer. His packs were only needing his toiletries, and he was ready to leave. He turned off his cell phone as there would not be a signal for quite a while. Then he went to the corral and sorted out the 2 horses he had purchased from Bill. One he saddled, and the other just got a halter. He led both back to the bunkhouse and tied them to a tree. Butch came out onto the porch as Missouri put the pack saddle on the second horse, and then started to lift the panniers into place. Going someplace, Missouri? Missouri continued to pack. Yeah, I got to see what is over the horizon. It's been a slice, but it's time to head on out. I am drawing my time here. Bill will explain in the morning about why I have to go so abruptly. Butch nodded. It's a woman, right? Missouri nodded. I wondered. You never seem to want to go to town on Saturday nights and howl a little. There aren't many unattached women in this neck of the woods, but everyone notices if someone isn't chasing what is available. So we all decided some woman did you wrong, and you were still hurting. Missouri nodded again. I just ain't ready to deal with her. Bill said she showed up here today, so it's time to go. When I have decided what to do, I will talk to her. Until then, I will just keep moving. Since you are on horseback, which direction are you heading? Do you figure she is watching your truck? I don't know which direction myself. If you don't know, then you can't tell if she comes and asks. And yes, I figure she's watching my truck. I'll come back and get it later. Missouri was done packing. He settled his hat a little and swung up into the saddle after putting the rifle into the scabbard there. His .45 was in a small holster in the small of his back. The sun was starting down in the west, and the shadows were lengthening. He nodded at Butch and turned and headed north. Missouri got his idea of horseback traveling from an old Zane Grey novel where the modern-day cowboy from the 1930s had traveled from Hollywood, where his horse was the star of motion pictures, to Wyoming. It was already uncommon to see someone on horseback even then, but it was possible to ride for days without seeing anyone at all. Missouri wasn't planning on going quite as far as Gray's hero, but he could stay off the highways and roads so Megan would get frustrated in not being able to immediately find him again. His supplies included ground cloths and a sleeping bag, a small dome tent for inclement weather, freeze-dried meals, jerky, water and extra water jugs, changes of clothes, and his personal items. His laptop, cell phone, and tablet were well packed. If he decided to lay up for a day, he had a solar charger for his electronics. There was a lack of firewood in the sandhills, so he was planning on using that old pioneer trick of burning dried cow dung, or cow patties, for heat and cooking. There were many small lakes in the valleys, so he could replenish his water anywhere. In a week, he could be 100 miles away and never see a person if he so desired. North was South Dakota and west was Wyoming. South and east were closer to more populated areas, so he wouldn't head in those directions for a while. He planned on making a wide loop around the Circle Bar X. The storage fees were paid up on his pickup for a long while, and he could electronically send money to keep the storage current whenever he got to a public library where the Wi-Fi is always free. He only went about 5 miles that first night before settling down for the night. He used a small camp stove to heat a quick meal before rolling up in his ground cloth and falling asleep. At first light, he rolled out of bed, checked his horses, and moved them to another spot of grazing before making some coffee and a quick breakfast. After eating, he packed the animals again and was soon off. Figuring Megan, if she persisted in looking for him, would find out he headed north, he went north a couple more miles before heading west. He was still on Circle Bar X land. As always, he was looking at the range conditions and any fences he came across. He could always let Bill know about any potential problems he encountered. After the few months of getting to know the land, he was confident on his location. Early on, the rolling hills had seemed the same. You would top out on a small hillock, and the next hill looked exactly the same. There were many accounts of ranchers and their offspring getting lost on their own property. Most uneducated would laugh, but the knowledgeable would just sigh and think about the times they had been turned around on land they knew very well. Missouri knew if he kept going west he would hit the highway and the edge of the Circle Bar X. If there was a gate he would use it, otherwise he was carrying fence pliers and would drop the fence and get the horses across before putting the fence back up. The second night found him 20 miles west of the highway on Lazy K ground. This was one of the places that Missouri had helped with branding and haying, so he kind of knew the ground. Again he made camp, but this time by a small lake. Since it was marshy around the lake, he stayed well back on dry land and just wanted the lake to get water. It was so pure that it didn't need purification, clear and tasteful. He did have to watch out for alkali lakes as they were not uncommon in the area. So went his days and nights. He would lay up in old tree belts for a day to rest the horses and then make 15 to 20 miles on other days. Every night he curried the horses and examined their hooves to make sure that one or the other didn't turn up lame. After a week's travel, he spotted a ranch house and approached it. As he came into the yard, the rancher came out of the house and called out, light and set, stranger. The man started to chuckle as Missouri did just that. Ain't been any reason to say that for probably 50 or 60 years. Just isn't anybody on horseback more than needed around here anymore. He looked at Missouri. Got a call the other day from an old friend, Bill Blaze, over at the Circle Bar X. Said there might be a drifter come along and needing a job for a spell. You the guy called Missouri? Missouri nodded. The old man, at least 70 if not a day older, put out his hand. Name's Ronnie Bentley. This here's the Double B. I'm a little stove up from arthritis and can use a new hand for a bit. You interested? Missouri was still reeling from this man knowing who he was. His facial expressions must have signaled his confusion. Son, you might be miles from the Circle Bar X, but in this sparsely populated area we all know each other. If not personally, then by reputation. Ain't no other man out riding with a pack horse but the man called Missouri. Bill said he called everyone he could in a 100-mile radius of his place to let them know that this Missouri guy might be calling. He vouched for you and said we would be getting on his bad side if he heard of anyone slighting his man. I guess we all have been looking out for you to stop by, even for a short bit. Missouri shook his head and thanked his new friend. Ain't nothing at all. Put your horses in the corral after you take care of them and come up to the house. Supper will be on in a few minutes. Missouri did just that. After entering the house, he was introduced to Millie Bentley, who immediately showed him the bathroom so he could clean up. After a filling supper, she showed him the towels and washcloths so he could shower and feel more civilized. They bedded him down in a guest bedroom for the night before retiring themselves. Missouri was up at dawn, as usual. Ronnie was already up and moving around, though slowly as his arthritis kept him from moving fast. Millie soon had breakfast on the table. After eating, Ronnie took Missouri on a tour of his place. The Double B was only about 8,000 acres compared to the Circle Bar X's 15,000 acres, but still large enough to need a couple of hands to get work done. Missouri helped fix some fence and then move large round bales off the meadow. He stayed there for a week before getting the bad news. After coming in hot and sweaty from the summer sun, Ronnie met him at the yard gate. There was some people here earlier. Said they was looking for some guy named Kelly Free. Told them I didn't know the name or who they was looking for. I don't think they believe me. Missouri shook his hand. Thank you, Ronnie. I guess I will pack up and be on my way in the morning. Did they say when they would be back through? They said they had been checking up north, so they might be headed south and then east again. They think this guy is hitchhiking around to the various ranches. The one woman seemed to be very anxious to talk to this Kelly guy. I suppose she might be. Don't know why, though. Sounds like she should just get on with her life. Missouri turned and went to the barn where his horses and his possibles were kept. He had been sleeping in the guest room, so he only took a change of clothes and toiletries into the house with him each day. Since he had been on the trail, he was sporting a nice mustache and full beard. At the Double B, he shaved his neck to reduce the scratchiness, but left the beard and mustache. He had used their internet connection to make sure his pickup was still safe, and had sent some emails to Bill Blaze thanking him for letting his neighbors know about Missouri's travels. He had also sent emails to his parents letting them know he was well, but not where he was. The next morning, he ate a great last breakfast and started to pack up. He paused long enough to order some supplies, particularly foodstuffs, to be delivered to an address in Gordon, Nebraska that Ronnie had given him. He figured it would take a week to get to Gordon. It would be his first foray into a town since leaving the Circle Bar X. For a full day, after leaving the Double B, it rained. Missouri put on his slicker and made sure his brim was down, and he kept riding. The horses didn't seem to mind, and his packs were waterproof. At the end of the day, he had probably only made 5 miles as the horses didn't want to walk very fast in the rain. He found an old abandoned barn and was able to get himself and the horses inside. It was lucky he did that as it started to lightning after they were safely undercover. Missouri again tended to his horses before heating up some stew and eating a hot supper. He hung his wet clothes on a makeshift clothesline before rolling up in his ground cloth again. It was too hot for his sleeping bag. The next day dawned bright and clear, so he made good time. At the end of the week, he was outside Gordon. This was a small town of about 1,600 people, but a hub of shopping for the area. Missouri staked the horses out on a small stream on the edge of town and then walked into the business district. He visited the small store there and picked up some canned goods and allowed himself to have a rare Coca-Cola. It was cold and refreshing. He walked back to the horses and packed the canned goods in the pannier before heading for the address Ronnie had given him. There he met the homeowner and retrieved his supplies. Back to the horses he went and packed these supplies also. His final trip of the day was into the library, where he spent some hours catching up on current events and using the public internet to send some emails. His attorney wanted to let him know that Megan was calling daily for information. Lawrence also let him know that Megan had never once mentioned divorce in any correspondence or conversation with him. His parents were supportive, but wanted him to come home. He sent them a reply stating he was healing and would soon contact them again. He checked the local news from his old hometown and found that Property Management Services had closed its doors. He was far enough removed that he took no satisfaction from the business failure. Overall, he was just sad that so many had lost their jobs. Then he decided to eat a prepared meal and headed to the local cafe that he had passed on his forays into town. He went in and sat down at a booth on the side of the room and was soon being served iced tea alongside his hot roast beef sandwich. It was going down smoothly when he started paying attention to the conversation from the booth behind him. The tall backs of the seats prevented people from sitting and seeing who was around them, and that usually afforded a good deal of privacy while eating, but the two people, at least Missouri, only heard two voices carried to him. The two must have not been worried about privacy. He had no idea how long they had been sitting there, but he recognized Megan's voice immediately. He is around here close. I can feel it. I have always been able to sense when he is near. I just hope he will stop long enough to talk with me so I can explain what we mean to each other. I have to make him believe me. The other person must have been Mary, but she spoke lower and was a little harder to understand. I am coming to the belief that he doesn't want to be found, or at least doesn't want to talk to you. Look, we have been coming to this godforsaken piece of shit land for the last couple of months and still haven't found him. These people aren't helping. Some of them are probably deliberately keeping him up to date on where we are looking so he can go somewhere else. I have never seen anybody be so good at hitchhiking to stay off the grid for so long. Hell, we have driven these highways so much we should have seen him hitching at some point. I know, but I need to find him and explain. I think he understood that day he came, and you let him catch us. I just don't think you did a good enough job to prepare him for it. I know. I should have brought up polyamory before. I just thought he was sophisticated enough to be on board with it. It doesn't mean that I love him less just because I want to share extraordinary sex with him and you and Mark, but I need to tell him that to his face. He won't answer emails or texts, and he certainly won't answer his phone when I call. Mary snorted. Well, with the spotty cell service up here in God's country, it is not out of the question that he might have ditched his phone. But this is starting to be a quest to find the Holy Grail. If he doesn't want to be found, we can't keep traveling up here. Mark will have to stay home this next trip to work, and I will have to do some extra time at my job to get my supervisor off my butt about how often I am gone. I don't know how your employer is giving you the time off. I told her that my husband is missing and I need to find him. She is being very patient with me, but I need to go back with you and work a couple of weeks before coming back again to look. Somehow I believe he is staying here in the Sandhills. I don't know why exactly. He had never mentioned this area the whole time we have been together. He has no family here, and he certainly can't be working without a vehicle. Do you think he bought a different car or pickup and is just leaving his truck in Hyannis to keep us guessing? Megan probably shrugged, but since Missouri couldn't see her, and certainly wasn't going to stand and look at her, I don't know, but I don't think so. Very little money has been spent by him since he left. After the first couple of days of fuel receipts, there has been nothing. I wouldn't even know he was in this area except for the alert I posted with law enforcement. A state patrolman talked with Kelly after he was spotted. He was working on that first ranch we checked at. I guess the rancher gave Kelly the heads up that we had been there because we certainly didn't get much help from that guy. I can't imagine Kelly doing menial work like that. He is an office dweller who occasionally has to go look at properties around the country. What would ever make him believe he could do whatever they do on a ranch? And to think that they live so primitively. Outhouses and no internet. I couldn't do that. Missouri almost started laughing until he remembered his bias when he first got to the Circle Bar X. His first general mental impression wasn't far from Mary's. He took heart in the fact that he never sat in a public space and commented on his perceptions of how backward he had believed ranchers lived. Someone here in the cafe was probably overhearing Mary and would not be ready to help her or Megan in their search for this Kelly Free. Suddenly, he shook himself. He was so used to being a man called Missouri that he was starting to think of Kelly as a stranger, someone he had known in the past but who had nothing to do with him now. Was he going crazy? As the women continued to talk, he contemplated the difference between Kelly Free and Missouri. Fundamentally, they were the same person, but Missouri was a ranch hand who had no real ties to anyone, but Kelly Free was a married man with responsibilities. Both had standards of right and wrong, and Kelly had been wronged by the woman sitting in the next booth. Kelly needed to finish his relationship with Megan, but Missouri didn't. He knew there would have to be a reconciliation between his old self and his new self, but it wasn't going to happen today. He started to pay attention again to the conversation behind him. Mary, I am going to check the library again. They have internet access, and Kelly will be needing to send some emails and get some answers from his lawyer. Since I know his passwords, I can access his email accounts and see if he is online. I may not know where he is, but it will narrow our search. And he might just tell someone, his parents or his lawyer, where he is. Somehow I will track him using his own accounts. Missouri almost pounded the table in frustration. Shit, he had forgotten that Megan knew the passwords of his private and his Yahoo account. There had been no need for secrecy in their lives until Megan had decided to have multiple sex partners. He would have to rectify that mistake as soon as possible. He racked his brain trying to remember if he or Lawrence had openly discussed his finances in an email or text message. He didn't think so, but he would have to check his history. Could Megan see if he was checking old emails? The duo must have been done eating as they got up, and preceded by Missouri with barely a glance at the man with the full beard and mustache seated in the next booth. Missouri leisurely finished his cup of coffee since it was very apparent that the two had no clue about his appearance, or were even contemplating a change from what they had known. Actually, he shouldn't be surprised since he had never worn a mustache or beard before, and Megan had always shown disdain at both and had stated she was not attracted to them, or even the current fashion of a couple of days beard growth on celebrities and actors. Missouri picked up his hat after leaving the tip and made his way to the cashier and settled his bill. He still had plenty of cash as he had cashed most of his checks from the Circle Bar X, and Ronnie Bentley of the Double B had paid him in cash. He kept most of it hidden in different pockets of his coat, his extra pants, and even the panniers so that it could be accessed but not all in one place. He went and bought some hard candy. He had always read that the old cowboys loved hard candy when out on the trail. He also purchased a couple of pints of a good whiskey, for medicinal purposes only, of course. He carried his plastic bag back to the camp. Somehow he must have been very quiet when approaching the camp as he startled the man going through his bags and belongings. Before he could even think about it, the .45 was in his hand and pointed at the interloper. Hands up. The man froze in his activity and slowly stood upright. Turn around, shithead. I like to see who I shoot. The man slowly turned. It was Mark Brooks, and he had a very pale, almost green look to his complexion. Missouri didn't let on he knew the man. Well, sonny boy, what the hell do you think you are doing? Mark managed to squeak out a comment. I am looking for someone. Well, dumb shit, you won't find him in my bags. Empty your pockets. What? Listen, shithead. I can shoot you right where you stand. Bet no jury around here will even leave the jury box to decide I was justified in shooting a common thief. You will be dead and, hell, I could be long gone before they even find your dumb shit body. Now empty your pockets so I can see that you aren't robbing me. Looking for someone is not a good excuse for stealing my stuff. Mark tried again. No, I am actually looking for someone. He is my best friend. My wife and his wife are in town looking for him, and I decided to look and see if he was camping out somewhere near here. We have been tracking him and think he is near here. His name is Kelly Free, and we need to find him so we can take him home with us. I was just looking to see if something in the bags would identify the owner since there was no one here at the time I arrived. Please, you have to believe me. Maybe I do and maybe I don't. I won't say this again. Empty your pockets on that log, or I will put a hole somewhere you don't want. He was slow to comply, so Missouri put a round between the dumbshit's feet. He knew he couldn't fire again as it disturbed the horses, and the first shot would get someone's attention. Any subsequent round would get people calling the sheriff to investigate, but Mark probably wouldn't think about that. It looked like the first round was almost making him lose his bowel control. Mark shakily emptied his pockets. Missouri was thinking fast. He had to keep his voice low and raspy to keep Mark from recognizing him. Obviously, the beard and mustache, probably along with the wide-brimmed hat, were a good disguise. Seeing that Mark didn't seem to have anything that belonged to him, Missouri indicated that he should pick up his stuff and put it back into his pockets. After that was done, Missouri backed Mark to the edge of his encampment. He made sure to keep his voice low. "Why don't you let this person alone?" Missouri put the .45 back into his holster in the small of his back. Mark started to let his hands come down. "He is my friend, and he has to be hurting. We want him to come home so he can heal. His wife wants to apologize and get him back into her life. If nothing else, she just wants to talk with him, face to face. She loves him, and he has been gone for months." Mark suddenly looked close at Missouri's face. His scare must have been over, and something must have looked familiar about Missouri. "What's your name, stranger?" "They call me Missouri." Mark's suspicions were raised now. "Why do they call you Missouri?" "Well, everyone has to answer to something. Texas is too common. Oklahoma is too long as is South Dakota. Iowa just sounds dumb. Kansas isn't too popular here in the beef state, and Nebraska would be a dumb name here in Nebraska, and I don't cotton to AITA, which is Nebraska backwards. Now, if I was in Missouri, I probably would be called something else entirely. But what is your legal name?" The .45 came back out. "You know, asking something like that can get you hurt badly, very badly. For all you know, I am an escaped felon. So why don't you learn a little lesson and go back where you came from before you find something you won't digest very well?" Mark's eyes were very wide open as the .45 still looked like a cannon to him. He nodded and slowly backed away. After stumbling a couple of times, he turned to look where he was walking and soon was running for his life. He didn't look back. Missouri gave a wry smile. Yep, now they would know what to call him when looking. Mark wasn't stupid. The disguise worked for a little bit. Actually, it wasn't a disguise, more of an easy way of dealing with his being away from civilization. Missouri started to immediately break camp. Wherever Mark had parked, he would be getting there fast. Either the sheriff or Megan would soon be here looking for him. His encampment was in trees and scrub brush, so he started downstream to use the brush and trees to hide him versus the open land surrounding the town. If he could get over the hills, he could hide again, but since he didn't know how long he just had to make do. Since he had broken camp many times, it didn't take long, only about 10 minutes. The horses were ready after their rest, so Missouri let the animals run down the stream for a couple of miles before exiting and starting to circle around Gordon. Cody was east of Gordon, but he didn't figure they would have public Wi-Fi, and he needed to contact Lawrence and find out if all of the items he wanted done were finished before he stopped to talk to Megan. She was not going to profit from this. It took time to negotiate the various fences he encountered, but he saw no one official as he did so. The occasional pickup or car that went by as he crossed the highway didn't slow or make any move that might make him think they were interested in him. As a matter of fact, most of the locals just waved and kept on. By nightfall, he was a few miles west and south of Gordon again. He stopped at a farmstead, and the owner allowed him to put the horses inside and then bed down in the barn himself. The owner, a single woman with a widowed mother who lived with her, invited him in for supper. He was surprised at the friendliness offered to him, but soon found out that they, like the ranchers, were kind of expecting him to show up. Martha, the owner, gave out a large laugh when he questioned her. "Missouri, everyone in the area is looking out for you. When the three idiots hit town this time, no one was offering any news about the guy they are looking for. Yeah, we aren't as stupid as they believe. We know who you are, but we also hear that you are a hard worker. You stay sober and are pleasant to women and a friend to anyone who needs one, and so you are one of us. They will look and then go home. The way the story goes, they come every other weekend or so and ask questions. Most of the ranches that you have traveled through know you were there, but no one bothers you. When you come into town, no one questions you. We all figure you have your reasons for why you are here and not talking to her, and that is good enough for us. Someday, maybe you will tell the real story, but I'll warn you, the gossip is probably better." He smiled at her and then proceeded to tell her his story. He started with his old adage of bad things coming in threes and laid them out to her. After telling her the entire story, she smiled back at him. "You know, the Lord works in very mysterious ways. You believe 3 bad things happened to you. First, you lost your job. But think on that. Your boss was a shit who kept trying to get you to live too large and too high on the hog and didn't appreciate you. Now you are free to do the same thing your way, and from how you tell it, there are a lot of clients out there who would be glad to do it your way." She paused. "Second bad thing was finding your wife is a 304 and has no morals. Losing your job that day allowed you to find out. How long would she have continued without you knowing? You say she was planning on that being the day, but was it really? Was she just going to continue to act as she was doing and hope for the best? No, that bad thing turned into a good thing. You got out of a terrible mess that wasn't your making." Missouri thought about it and started to agree. He was now healthier and more mature than when he was working for Jerry Myers. He was thinking farther ahead in his plans, even though right now he seemed to be living day to day while traveling on horseback. She continued. Thirdly, your pickup breaking down in Hyannis. It might not have been any better had you planned on it. The whole thing, driving west out of Missouri, turning north to Nebraska, then turning and heading into the Sandhills. I believe God was sending you to heal. He wanted you to meet that rancher. He wanted you to calve and make hay. You needed the change, and he provided it. I imagine you really do look different than you did a few months ago. You said it yourself that your wife walked right by you and didn't recognize you. That other idiot going through your camp may think it was you based on your name, but since no one immediately came out to the camp, either he is too afraid of the new you or he doubts that it was really you. She took a breath before going on. You probably look older now. Since you are not wearing sunglasses, you will have to squint your eyes against the sunlight. Your beard has a couple of gray hairs in it. Your hair is about shoulder length now, and I imagine as an office person you usually were short-haired and clean-shaven. Your hair even has a curl to it, and I will bet it never was long enough to do that before. I would also hazard a guess that sitting here with me has been the most you have spoken in a while. Your voice gets rusty when you don't talk much. That guy, Mark, would not be able to state that it was your voice he heard. Missouri chuckled. He did seem very preoccupied by the end of my gun. She laughed. Oh Lord, everyone is going to get a good laugh about that one. I know. I shouldn't tell anyone what you told me, but I will have to the next time I am in town. That might be tomorrow, as I have to go to the church and do some bookwork. Missouri finally had something to smile about. This lady, at least 60 years old and very large, was funny and had a great disposition. Her mother was still able to get around and help out, but was more abrupt in her demeanor. It was hard to envision them as mother and daughter. Missouri stayed there for a couple of days before heading into town again. He camped again on the edge of town and walked in to do his business. His first stop was the library, where he accessed their Wi-Fi and set up a new throwaway free email account and used it to contact Lawrence Roberts. He then called Lawrence's office on his cell phone and was soon letting his attorney know the new email address so he could make sure that any emails from Missouri weren't sent to the spam file. Lawrence was able to assure Missouri that the money had all been transferred out of the country and shouldn't be available for Megan to access. He did warn Missouri that the courts could and would demand an accounting of all funds, and then would order Missouri to surrender at least 50% in the final decree. Missouri asked, "What happens if I never file for divorce?" Megan can wait and file for divorce citing abandonment. There would still be an accounting of assets for distribution. But what happens if she can't find me to have me served? She will still have a judgment against you for whatever the court decides. I can represent you in absentia, but most judges don't like that and will penalize you for your unwillingness to appear. He paused for emphasis. Face it, Kelly, the courts are stacked against the man in these affairs. Up until the late 60s, it was all too often the man of the marriage who came away with the lion's share of the assets, while his poor wife and children suffered. Now the courts are biased against the male and bend over backwards to reward the female. It also assumes that the male is making more than the female, which in your case was true until you lost your job. Her attorney will also try to make out that you only allowed her a pittance of what was rightfully hers by community property laws. The court will probably agree and punish you for leaving her. There is seldom any consideration for what you were going through, especially in the larger cities where men seem to be emasculated at every turn. Missouri countered. Since I have established residency here, is there any way we can file here and have a local court hear my case against her? No, sorry. Your marriage and most of your married life together were here in Missouri and should be heard by a local court and judge. If you could get her to establish residency there, wherever you are, then there is a chance you might get a better judgment. I guess we just leave things the way they are for now. I will start moving again. There is a lot of area for me to travel and a lot of square miles for her to search for me. I will contact you again when I get the chance. For now, we will continue as we have been doing. A couple of days later, Missouri walked into town to a convenience store and bought a pay-as-you-go phone so that he could keep his regular phone off and the battery out just in case Megan was able to track whenever he used the phone. Back at his camp, he found he had a fairly good signal, so he decided to call his erstwhile wife. First, he tried the house. He realized it was still early in the day, so she might be at work. He dredged his memory and finally remembered her work number and called it. He got the switchboard and then was put through to her extension. He was surprised. She must have gotten a promotion, as she never had an extension before. She picked up on the second ring. Hello, this is Megan Free. How may I help you? I am surprised you are still using my name. Why aren't you using the name of your other family, the Brooks? Who is this? Is this some kind of prank call? If it is, I am not laughing. What? You don't recognize your own husband? Has Mark been panting in your ear so much that you can't believe it is me? I am surprised you are at work instead of screwing your friends. Did you get a promotion to rate a separate extension number? Of course, she ignored all his comments after his first question. Is this really you, Kelly? This isn't some kind of prank? Why would anyone call you and pretend to be me? We are small potatoes in the scheme of things. Every time we come to Nebraska, I leave cards with my numbers on them in case someone happens to see you. Most of the time, anyone who calls leads us on a wild goose chase, but occasionally someone calls and tries to tell me that it is my Kelly. The first few times I fell for the joke. God, I hate those people. She must have checked her display. Hey, this isn't Kelly's phone number. What's going on? I am not using my phone in case you are trying to track me. That's not why I called. I want you to quit looking for me. I don't want to see you, talk to you, hear from you, or have any kind of dealing with you or your sex buddies. Leave me be. File for divorce. The court will give you half of everything, and I will direct my attorney to make it available to you. Just forget you ever met me. Take back your maiden name or take the Brooks name as yours. But Kelly, honey, I love you and miss you. Please come home or meet me somewhere so I can show you how I feel. Yeah, you love me so much you screw our best friends and think I should be happy for the leftovers. Tell me, how long were you going to carry on behind my back? Please don't lie, since I did come home early that day, and you had no idea that I was going to do so. I don't know. I was trying to introduce the concept of polyamory, but I was afraid of how you were going to take it. I guess I was right. You didn't take it well. No shit, Sherlock. What would have ever given you that idea? Wait, it doesn't matter anymore. I don't care. Your excuses don't mean a thing. Just leave me alone. There was silence for a few moments. Missouri was about to hang up when Megan started to talk again. She was hard to understand as she must have started to cry. I love you and miss you. I want you back in my home and my bed. Please, don't hang up. Why do you want me back? I provide $2,000 a month to help your expenses. You have to have received a boost in pay with your promotion, so you don't need much of my money. You have 2 people who, I would imagine, would immediately move into your house and keep you warm at night. Obviously, you enjoy sex with them. You don't need me, especially the way I am now. No, you don't understand. I love Mary and Mark, but I am in love with you. They never replaced you. We don't have that connection that you and I have. I mean Mark and Mary, don't share dreams together like you and I did. I want to need that back. Missouri actually made a derisive snort. Ain't gonna happen. I don't dream about you. As a matter of fact, I go weeks not thinking about you except to wonder if and when we will accidentally meet up. I am still trying to decide if I will just walk away, slap the shit out of you then walk away, or decide that a little frontier justice is needed. What do you mean by frontier justice? In days gone by, an adulterous woman and her lover, or lovers in your case, could be killed and the court didn't care. Listening to some of the gossip here, the feeling of frontier justice runs about 50%. The rest just feel you are a fool and need to stay in the city where fools are more tolerated. I guess I won't really know how I will respond until that very moment we are face to face. So you have been warned. Megan continued to cry. There was some background noise, but Missouri couldn't quite make out what was said. Megan covered the handset, but he could hear her tell someone that she was all right and that she was just trying to talk to her husband. When she returned to talk to her estranged husband, she was talking to a dead phone. Missouri ruefully told himself that he was not being very polite as he turned the phone off and went to work to prepare his midday meal. He thought about his comment about how little he thought about her anymore. It was true. He was more concerned about making sure his packs were not wearing on his pack horse. He thought about his next destination. He thought about the weather and how it might affect his travels. He thought about how he could help the next rancher he came across. But he seldom wasted a thought about Megan and their marital woes, except about how she had disrespected him and their vows, or occasionally, he tried to make the case that they should reconcile. More and more often it would be days to weeks before he gave her even a little thought. Right at the moment he was a little angry that she was still trying to see him, but his anger was fading from the white-hot anger he had felt that day he stumbled into the love nest. He was also no longer bewildered and confused. There was no longer a marriage if his wife felt she could screw others with impunity and expect him to just accept it and, worse, join in. He wasn't some college-aged, hormone-driven frat boy who looked for orgies and girls with no morals. No, he was an almost middle-aged man who had been intent on raising a family with the love of his life. She just turned out to be an overgrown sorority 304. Actually, his distancing himself from Megan and their marriage was doing what he had hoped it could do. Quite frankly, he was rapidly getting to that indifferent stage in his feelings for Megan. He was getting over her and her actions. Soon he might just shrug his shoulders when reminded of what she did to him and their marriage, and maybe give out a sigh for what might have been. He told himself, as he finished eating his lunch, that he soon should file for divorce from her and take control away from the witch. There were some delay tactics she could employ, but not keep the divorce from happening. With that thought, he accessed the internet on his phone and sent the appropriate message using the new email account. Soon it would be done. The next morning, he broke camp quite early and headed south again. He intended on stopping at the Circle Bar X and visiting with Bill and Connie Blaze for a while. He was sure they would welcome him back. It was getting late in the season, and he wanted a more permanent situation before the first frost made sleeping out under the stars an uncomfortable experience. For days, saw him over halfway to Hyannis when he spotted some smoke on the horizon. Damn, a wildfire here could be very dangerous. He proceeded on to try and find the seat of the fire before trying to call for help. As he got closer, the smoke was dissipating, which gave him the idea that the fire was out and not building. Suddenly, when he crested a small hill, he could now see what had been on fire. There was a helicopter that must have made a hard landing in the meadow below and had caught on fire. The fire seemed to have gone out and, luckily, had not caught the green grass on fire. He wondered if there were any survivors. As he rode closer, his question was answered, as he saw someone moving near the wreckage. A lone female was working to drag something. When Missouri got close enough, he yelled out, "Hello, the camp," as he didn't want to startle the survivor. The woman didn't seem startled. As a matter of fact, she immediately raised up her arm and waved him in. As he came close, she shaded her eyes and looked up at her rescuer. "I'm so happy to see someone. We went down yesterday, but figured someone would be out looking for us before now." Missouri stepped down from his horse and dropped the reins and lead rope for his horses. They were ground-broke quarter horses and wouldn't move unless startled too much. "Are you the only survivor?" "No, my partner, Jane, was hurt. She is over there under the shelter. I believe she fractured some vertebrae in her back on impact. The pilot is dead." Missouri surmised this was a medical helicopter. "Where were you heading?" "We were flying from North Platte to Valentine when we started to have some kind of electrical issue. The pilot tried to get us down, but the engine stalled, and we were too close to the ground to auto-rotate down safely. After the impact, I got out and then went back for Jane, but I couldn't get to Sam before the fire started. He was unconscious, so I don't think he suffered too much from the flames." Missouri nodded. "Why were you so far west if you were headed for Valentine?" He waved toward the northeast. "It is over that way, and you are not in a direct line between North Platte and Valentine." "Oh, no, that can't be. No wonder we haven't been found yet. They will be looking for us over east." Sam said that he didn't trust the GPS after the power surge, but it must have led him this way. "The radio went out in the surge, and we didn't have time to use the SAT phone before we went down. Why not use it now? You should be able to hit a satellite. It was in the bird when the fire started. I grabbed the survival gear and threw it out to safety and then went after Jane. It was too hot in the cabin by the time I got her clear." Missouri nodded. They were by the small shelter by that time. He could hear the other woman moaning in pain. The first woman shrugged her shoulders. "I couldn't get to the medications either, so she is hurting badly. With her injuries, I can't move her anymore, or she might have permanent damage to her spinal cord. She is the nurse and I am the flight paramedic. I have made her as comfortable as I could." Missouri looked around and then pulled out his pocket GPS unit. After studying it for a minute or so, he came up with a plan. "Look, there is no cell service here either. I see that there is a ranch house about 10 miles south of here. Unless there are a lot of fences between here and there, I should be able to get there in a couple of hours and use their phone to get help out here. I programmed your location into the GPS, so help should not have to search much to find you. I will leave my pack horse here as there is food in the pack. There is also a small cook stove and a tent if you need it." The paramedic nodded. "I wish we could go with you, but it is best if we stay near the bird, just in case the emergency locator suddenly starts to work before you get to help." Missouri quickly stripped the panniers off his pack horse and staked it out to get to the good grass. He then swung back up in the saddle. Before heading off, he had a thought. "Since you will surely be gone before I can ride back here, just tell the others to leave my horse and the packs here and I will be back to get them." She nodded. "Good luck to you and your partner. I will get help as soon as I can get to the ranch house." With that, he did something he very seldom did. He never wore spurs as there had not been a need to ride fast, but now he kicked the horse in the slats and took off at a fast lope. It was too far for a flat-out race, but he and his horse would make good time to effect a rescue. Stopping only to drop a couple of fences, he made good time. His horse rested as he pulled staples and lowered the wires until they could safely cross. He didn't bother to staple the fence back up. The normal tension of the wires would have to suffice until later. True to his estimate, Missouri rode into the ranch yard a couple of hours after leaving the wreck site. Thankfully, the rancher was home, so he didn't have to search the house for the landline telephone. After explaining his mission, the rancher made the call to the local authorities. The nearest fire department and ambulance was about 30 minutes away, so the rancher and his hands took off with pickups and UTVs for the site. Extra blankets, food, water, and bandages were hastily thrown in. Armed with the location from Missouri's GPS, they were soon dust on the horizon. Missouri didn't go with them as he needed to care for his horse. He pulled the saddle off and rubbed the animal down. As he worked, he also heard and saw a couple of helicopters go over. One appeared to be military and the other that might have been another medical helicopter. Both were flying on a heading that should get them to the site without difficulty. He assumed the local sheriff's department had notified the searchers where the chopper had gone down. The paramedic, whom Missouri realized he had never asked her name, and her partner Jane would soon be on the way to a hospital. After his horse was rested, Missouri saddled up and headed back to retrieve his pack horse and what was left of his supplies. He replaced the staples in the fences as he returned. The fire department and local ambulance were on scene when he arrived at the crash site. The larger rig was parked where it could not leave tracks that would interfere with the investigation, while a couple of smaller grass rigs came closer. The ambulance also stayed out away from the site. Somehow he missed the return of the rancher and his crew, as he was the lone civilian when he got to the crash site. The sheriff and some deputies were present to secure the site and keep gawkers and predators away. One of them told Missouri that the poor pilot couldn't be moved until the NTSB arrived on the scene. Missouri shook his head at the disrespect for the dead, but figured it wasn't his concern anymore. He had done what he could. He just started to pack his horse so he could resume his travels. Missouri was packed and ready to leave when one of the men wearing a badge stopped and asked, "You know, in all the excitement of you showing up out of nowhere, we never asked your name. I'll bet the investigators will want to know who you are. I am assuming you're the guy called Missouri, am I right?" Missouri nodded. "You have probably heard my story. If at all possible, I would like to remain just Missouri in the reports. I am not quite ready to see my wife yet, so I need to put some miles between here and where I am heading. Also, could you not tell them which way I am heading?" The sheriff nodded. None of the firefighters or EMTs were close enough to hear the conversation. Later, they would all just say they looked up and Missouri was gone over the nearest hill. Of course, the sheriff wasn't stupid. He knew Missouri's real name and let the NTSB investigators know it, but didn't relate it to the news reporters when they arrived on the scene. Missouri didn't realize it, but his travels were approaching legendary status. Megan and the Brooks were still driving all the way to the area routinely, but each person they talked to reportedly had seen Missouri in a different spot, sometimes miles and miles apart on the same day. Rescues of ranchers and travelers were attributed to him. All claimed they heard from someone who had talked to someone who had spotted him and his horses. Sometimes he was seen with a clean new white hat, reminiscent of the Lone Ranger. Sometimes he had his black hat on. His horses were amazingly different. A couple of witnesses swore he rode a Palomino that was almost pure white. Others had him on a roan, or maybe even a paint. Each and every deed that was laid at his door gave him almost mythical status. Girls and young women swore they had given him succor when he was down. Each would give a secret smile when asked just exactly the succor they had provided him. A couple of ranchers, where he had actually stayed a few days to a few weeks, did have daughters of the right age, and all claimed that Missouri was nothing less than a true gentleman in every sense of the word. Hell, his prowess as a cowhand was also approaching legendary status. Some communities put out the story that he had even competed under an assumed name in their local rodeo, and always won all-around cowboy for his bronc riding, calf roping, team roping, and steer wrestling exploits. He was never a bull rider or a bullfighter. No one ever really came up for a reason for that detail. His horses were also of legendary status. Many a cowboy claimed they had been allowed to ride Missouri's horse in pinning contests, as well as roping and team roping events. One barrel racer claimed her horse had come up lame before her event, and Missouri had demanded she ride his horse even though he had never raced barrels before, and that she had one that night. Missouri was close to the Circle Bar X when a state patrolman stopped him for a chat. That was kind of strange. He couldn't be speeding on horseback, and he had been paralleling the highway but staying off the right-of-way. That was also in case Megan and her lovers happened to come along right then. Anyhow, the patrolman stopped at a gate and waited for Missouri to come up to him. He took note of the fact that Missouri was now wearing his .45 on his hip. "Say, son, could you light and set for a few moments? I would like to chat with you for a bit, if you don't mind." Missouri hooked his leg over the pommel and around the horn and leaned back. "No, I guess not. Don't have to be any place soon. Just headed down the road a piece. That wouldn't be Bill Blaze's ranch, would it?" Hearsay is that he is a close friend of yours. I don't know about friends so much as mentor and boss man. When I first came to the Sandhills, God, has it only been 4 or 5 months? It seems like a lot longer than that, but the days are getting shorter and the nights are getting colder. I am hoping he will need some help all winter. Oh, I don't think that will be any problem. When I spoke with him last, he mentioned I might run across you and told me to let you know the latch string is out for you anytime you were back in the area. He paused. Have you talked with your wife? She still occasionally calls us about any updates on you. I spoke to her once on the phone. I told her to file for a divorce and get on with her life. I have. Why is she still bothering you? Well, it might have to do with the stories that are going around. What stories might those be? That was when he found out about all his supposed experiences. The patrolman chuckled as he regaled Missouri of all his exploits that the patrolman could remember. Missouri was amazed and a little flummoxed. In this short time of one long summer, no man could have done even a fraction of what the patrolman was relating, and he said as much. The patrolman waved his hand. Hell, we all know that, but a little mystery, a little romance due to the mystery, and a couple of real events and things like this take a life of their own. Missouri shook his head. Kind of sounds like those old-time novels about the Old West. I would bet that most of them were made-up plots with real people being named in them. Yeah, probably wouldn't sell now, but I do know that there is at least 3 people on Facebook and Snapchat that claim to be you and have long arguments on who is the real Missouri. Funny thing is, not one of them actually states your real name. Either they don't know it, or are keeping it quiet to prolong the mystery. Hell, all you need is a black mask, and someone will start calling you the Lone Ranger. I would need silver bullets too, I guess. Missouri touched his beard. I guess I would also need to be clean-shaven to be the good guy. They both had a good chuckle. Soon the patrolman let Missouri get on down the hills as he then went back to his patrol. After telling his cohorts that he had spoken to Missouri, the legend grew a little more. A day later, he was back on Circle Bar X land. He had decided he would check to see if Bill needed a hand for the winter. If so, he would light and set where it was comfortable at night. His roping had improved as he had practiced on cows and steers that he had encountered during his travels. While he didn't believe he would yet be a top hand, he did have some of the skills needed. If Bill didn't want him back, there were a few others, like Ronnie Bentley on the Double B, who might need a hand for the winter. There was little fanfare as he entered the ranch yard. He didn't come in on a high lope like the old westerns, and he figured someone had seen him before he rode in, so he wasn't thinking he would surprise anyone. And he was correct. The Blazes and Butch came out of the house as he pulled up. Howdy, stranger. Bet you would like a good cup of coffee and a comfortable chair after your sojourn around the hills. Missouri had to chuckle. Yes, sir, that would be good. Can I let my horses out in your corral? Bill had a broad grin on his face. Well now, I don't know about that. Are you still the same Missouri that rode away from here early summer? Connie gave her husband a little thump on the head. Missouri, don't put up with any of his jokes. 10,000 comedians out of work, and look what I get stuck with. Come on in after you take care of your horses. Bill and Butch kept chuckling as they helped Missouri pull the saddle and the panniers off the horses and give them a quick rub and some grain after putting them into the corral. Then they helped haul all of Missouri's possibles to the bunkhouse, where Missouri was pleased to see he still had the same room. Haas had moved on, but there was a new young hand. Butch made the introductions. Missouri, this is Jesse. I call him Outlaw. He is still very wet behind the ears, but we have hopes. He turned to the very young-looking hand. Outlaw, this is Missouri. Yeah, the real deal legend. Young Jesse was tongue-tied to meet a legend, so the handshake was tentative. Missouri just smiled at the youngster. Later, Butch told him that Jesse claimed to be 18, but Bill believed the lad was actually a 16-year-old runaway. He was checking with the sheriff's department about his suspicions. Bill and Butch were going to keep the illusion about Outlaw's age going until they heard back from the sheriff. Connie was having the youngster come to supper each night in the ranch house. This evening, Connie invited Missouri and Butch over to the house for supper to celebrate the return of their friend. During the supper, Missouri let them know the high points of his travels, including overhearing his wife and her female lover in the cafe in Gordon. Bill and Butch both got a good chuckle out of Missouri's account of his run-in with his former friend, Mark. Young Jesse just absorbed the accounts with a gaping mouth and wide-open eyes. Then, after a great filling meal, the others tried to outdo each other, regaling the legend about the exploits, including a much-exaggerated tale about the medical helicopter. Bill took the floor for that one. According to the latest story, which by the way is on the internet, you came over the last hill at a fast lope and jumped off your horse at the last moment and swept up Casey, the young paramedic, as she was swooning from relief at being rescued. You then build a cabin out of the sod to give her and her partner, Jane, protection from the horrendous tornado that was bearing down on the site before riding right into the teeth of the storm to effect their rescue. Somehow you covered the miles to the highway, climbed the cell phone tower, and hacked the system to call for help. You used your high-intensity flashlight to guide the helicopters to the site, and then climbed down and led the others on the ground back to the site where you gently removed the pilot from the wreckage and led a prayer for him. Missouri was flabbergasted. He then told them the true story. Hell, he didn't even know the paramedic's name, and the pilot was still in the wreckage when he got back for his pack horse and supplies because the NTSB had radioed orders to the sheriff's department covering that area. The stories went on and on. Sightings of Missouri and his variously colored horses included a huge area of the Sandhills from O'Neill to the east and as far west as Alliance. The internet also gave sightings as far north as Modo in South Dakota and as far south as McCook in Nebraska. They all had a good laugh discussing the improbability of a man on horseback covering that much area in so few months. Yes, it was possible, but so highly improbable as Missouri didn't have any particular need to speed on his travels. Connie came and examined Missouri's face and scalp for injuries. When asked, she related that he was reported to have many fights defending poor defenseless women and girls in every town that he had traveled to. Some of the accounts came from the supposed attackers, and all accounts had Missouri handling his foes with ease, even the largest and most aggressive ones. It was a great night with old friends and a new friend. Outlaw relaxed and started to give Missouri a little guff just like the others. Bill finally asked what Missouri had planned. Well, I hope that you might have need for me to work this winter. I am through roaming for a while. If Megan shows up again, I will sit and talk with her and let her know that we are through. She can have the house and half my money if she doesn't fight the divorce. If she wants to fight, I will use my story to destroy her and her lovers. She has the choice. Bill and Connie nodded. Bill spoke first. Of course, you have a job here on the Circle Bar X. Everything is pretty much caught up, except we need to haul the bales of hay back to the ranch house as feed this winter. With you here, we will get that done quickly, and then just keep watch over the cows until we need to bring them close. Connie spoke next. We have gained some popularity from your travels. Somehow it got out that the Circle Bar X was your starting point, and it is now considered your home. We get a few visitors every week just checking to see if you had made it back yet. You have quite a fan club in these parts. If it is all right with you, I would like to be out riding fence whenever any visitors stop by. I have no idea what I would even tell any fan of mine except to not believe everything they hear. We have gotten a couple of phone calls from that girl, Casey, and her friend Jane. They wish to thank you personally for saving their lives. The emergency locator in the tail section failed to activate and was damaged in the fire. Who knows how long it would have been before they were found. Bill paused. So, will you meet with them if they show up? I don't know when that Jane person will be released from the hospital. Her injuries were pretty extensive, according to the news reports. Missouri nodded. Yeah, I will meet with them. That Casey girl had it all under control when I arrived. She had Jane as comfortable as she could make her. She used my small tent to protect her some more and made them both a meal to tide them over until the cavalry showed up. By the time I got back, they had been airlifted out and were probably at the hospital in North Platte or Kearney. I actually don't know where they were taken. The fire guys and EMTs at the scene weren't too sure. That supper set the tone for Missouri's return to the ranch. He found that Bill had gone into Hyannis and had retrieved Missouri's pickup. It was being stored in one of the machine sheds. Missouri set it up to pull a used horse trailer that he purchased locally. If he needed to travel again, he had the option of driving his faithful steeds with him to new areas that might just include Wyoming or North Dakota. He drove to Alliance to replace his clothes as they were very worn from his travels. He used the old 3-inch brim hat and had reduced his full beard to a goatee with mustache. No one seemed to know who he was when he went to the various stores to make his purchases. That suited him fine. True to his word, Bill sent Missouri out on horseback every time strangers showed up at the ranch. One of the questions he would ask any visitor was about recent sightings of Missouri. They would all have a chuckle as the supposed sightings continued, even though Missouri had seldom left the ranch for weeks. It was now late fall. The days were still warm, but there was a definite chill in the air each night, and there were frost warnings most days from the Weather Service. The last of the bales were moved from the hay fields to the various smaller holding pastures where the cows and bulls would winter. Fences were always on the list of things to do. Missouri would ride a horse to check his fences and spend a little time roping the fence posts for practice. He was improving all the time. He still carried his .45 on his hip, just in case he came across an aggressive coyote or maybe an upset badger. In early November, the dreaded visitors showed up. Megan came with the Brooks to the Circle Bar X. For the first time since she had started her quest, and the umpteenth time she had come to the ranch, she was invited into the ranch house while Missouri was sent for. The Brooks were told very emphatically that they were not welcome and to stay in the car. They bristled up at that, but Butch had a quiet word with them, and suddenly they were not so belligerent. Butch told Bill later that he just informed them that there was a lot of empty space for a couple of lonely graves, and that seemed to take the air out of their sails. He did bring each of them some water to keep themselves hydrated, while Megan met with her estranged husband. Connie introduced herself and Bill to Megan and had her sit at the dining room table with a glass of water. There was no attempt to converse with her further. As far as they were concerned, Megan was the enemy of their employee and friend and didn't need to have any polite conversation come her way. Megan was forced to wait some 30 minutes before she heard footsteps coming from the kitchen area. The man who appeared at the doorway from the kitchen to the dining room was a stranger. He seemed taller than her husband. His hair was definitely longer than Kelly always kept his. This man squinted as though he was used to gazing on very sunlit vistas. This man was wearing a black Western hat with an 8-inch brim to shade his eyes. The hat was pulled low on his forehead. This stranger also had a mustache and goatee where her husband was always clean-shaven, even if he had to shave 2 times a day to keep his face baby smooth for his wife. This man barely nodded his head in acknowledgement of her presence. He placed a glass of water on the table, then sat down across from her, leaned back on the sturdy dining room chair, and crossed his legs. "Well, Megan, you have finally tracked me down. Just to let you know, I have decided to not avoid you any longer, so we can get this whole affair over and done with, and you can get on with your life." Megan didn't respond. She was still trying to reconcile this cowboy with her husband. His voice was familiar, but nothing else really screamed out at her that this was Kelly, the man she had been married to for over 6 years. Finally, she extended a hand to Missouri. "Is it really you, Kelly?" He nodded. She looked around and saw Connie peeking around the corner. "Are you trying to pull a fast one on me? Is this some kind of sick joke? I have been searching for my husband for months, and you try to get some ranch hand to pose as Kelly Free. Do you take me for some kind of fool? Where is my husband?" Connie just shook her head and pointed at Missouri. "That is the man who came to our ranch, broken and beaten. He told us his name, but never used it again after that fateful day. This is Missouri, formerly known as Kelly Free. He has grown up and matured more than when you knew him. He has learned and accepted the change in his life. He is a better man than you deserve, and you need to sit and talk and get both your lives straightened out so he can finish healing and you can move on. But this is a stranger. I know you don't like me, but how could you do this to me? How do you explain that you say Kelly is here, but then bring in this guy?" She broke down and started to cry. "I need my husband. I need Kelly. Please bring him to me. I beg you to have some mercy. I have been looking for so long. Please, please, please." She buried her head in her hands on the table. "Megan, listen to me. Oh, how do I say this? It is me, or it is I. Anyhow, I am Kelly Free. I may not look like the man you knew, but I am still your husband, at least for a little while longer. You decided to start a new relationship with Mary and Mark Brooks and thought I would accept it and maybe even join in. I was so surprised, upset, and disappointed that I couldn't stand to stay there in Missouri, so I drove here and got a job after my pickup broke down. I learned new things and I traveled some to find my way, and now I am finally ready to confront you." Megan shook her head. This man, this stranger with the hair on his face, wearing a black hat, brown from being outside, sounded like her Kelly, but this man seemed taller, more mature, stronger in character, with a work-hardened body. It couldn't be her Kelly, could it? She looked around. Connie Blaze had come in and had sat down next to her and was holding her hand to comfort her and reassure her. Kelly went on and spoke of a few events that the two had shared prior to the infidelity. These events would not have been known to anyone else. Missouri took off his hat and laid it on the table. It was so hard to accept, but this man was her husband. He looked like something out of the Old West. She looked to see if he had a 6-gun on his hip. Nope, but there was a semi-automatic pistol there. Kelly noticed where she was looking. He carefully pulled the gun from its holster and placed it on the table past his hat. "I am sorry that you don't feel safe at the moment. I carry the gun to shoot at coyotes and the occasional rattlesnake when I am riding. It feels so natural to wear it now that I don't really pay attention and take it off when I don't need it. But why did you leave me? I love you. I left because it was obvious I was not enough for you. You broke the vows we stated to each other before God, our friends, and our relatives. You took other lovers without discussing it with me. By doing so, you stomped on my heart, my feelings, and my desire to stay married to you. You showed the maximum disrespect to me and to our marriage. I had to leave to get my head around all of it. I finally have come to terms with how you treated me. But it was just Mary and Mark, our friends. We were just expanding our relationship with them. Sharing our bodies made us all closer. Maybe you felt that way. I felt cheated, angered, and sick to my stomach to come home unexpectedly and find you all having sex in my house, let alone my bedroom. I had to leave before I did something to humiliate me or something that would have caused great and lasting harm to you and your sex buddies. What do you mean by humiliate yourself? When I was standing in that doorway, watching you screw each other, I couldn't decide if I should fall to the floor and curl up like a baby and bawl my eyes out, or if I should run to the bathroom to puke my guts out and then cry like a baby, or whether I should just come in and beat you all to death for what you did to me in our marriage. When you got off the bed and came to me, I was so repulsed that the only way to keep from shoving you away was to leave immediately, so I did so. He stopped to look at the expression on her face. She seemed to still be in denial at how much she had hurt him. He continued, I drove around the city for hours before finding myself headed west. I finally decided that as long as I was moving, I didn't have to decide on what to do with you. When I became stranded here in Hyannis, I was forced to accept the reality of what you had done. Our marriage was over at that time. There is no coming back from that level of lies and disrespect. I still wasn't ready to confront you, so I accepted a job here at the Circle Bar X. These people didn't have to accept me, yet they did. They didn't have to extend their hospitality to a stranger, yet they did. I knew nothing of how to be a ranch hand, but they took me in, cared for me, and taught me how to work hard. And the whole time, they never once showed me any disrespect or ridicule concerning my personal life. Connie sat and nodded at Missouri's statements. They had done all of that and more, some of which Missouri might not ever know. He had no idea how many times Bill or Butch were just a few miles away from wherever Missouri had stopped to camp. They were always ready to assist him should he need it, and they were proud that he had not needed them, not one time in all the months he traveled. He had matured into the type of hero that Zane Grey or Louis L'Amour or so many others wrote about. He had become a man to ride the river with. He was accepted wherever he went. He was one of them, a sandhiller. He would stand tall wherever he might now travel, around the country or back to the city. She gave a thought about his old boss. What was his name again? Jerry or Terry or something like that. She would bet that his former boss would hesitate to criticize Missouri now. He now had the countenance, the self-assurance, and the backbone to stare down any opponent and be able to back it up with physical action if necessary. For some reason, Megan still seemed to be in denial of Kelly's presence after being apart for so long. She sat and shook her head. This couldn't be happening to her. All these months, she labored under the delusion that Kelly was hurting, but would race back into her arms when they finally met. He loved her and needed her in his life. This was the delusion she had built in her mind over the months. She still also felt that Kelly would embrace her preferred lifestyle, and she and Mary would screw him almost to death. She just needed to get Kelly in a bed and all would be good again. Kelly saw by her expression that she was still committed to the course of action she had started last spring in Missouri. He shook his head. He had no idea how to get her to finally understand that her dreams were now a nightmare for him. There would be no reconciliation. He tried again. Megan, now that you believe that I am Kelly, let us get down to business. When you get home, you will be served with divorce papers. Please just sign them and let the divorce happen. I have been generous. You need to read the papers to see the settlement that I am offering is fair. You can then openly make a life with the Brooks. She shook her head in denial. No, I don't accept that. You just need to experience the love making that we all share. You will then understand what I have been trying to get you to experience. The variety of having two women make love to you, and the joy of watching us pleasure each other. You will then see. No, Megan, I will not. It will not happen. That way of life is not for me. You need to leave and not try to see me again. I will appear at the hearing with the judge. If you try to stop the divorce, I will call every news person I can find and tell them the whole story. Your parents and your friends will probably not want to be around you anymore as they do not believe in your bullshit way of life. The Brooks will probably be embarrassed, and I think they will bail on you when the going gets a little rough. Just sign the papers, and you can live your delusion for as long as you wish. He stood and stepped back from the table. He was done talking, even though Megan was still trying to somehow excuse her lifestyle and drag him into her sewer. As she was talking, she was trying to stand up, but she was struggling. He had not noticed before since he had been only looking at her face, but her belly was swollen. So, I guess Mark swimmers were pretty good. When are you due? Do your parents know who the father is, or have you been lying to them? She gestured to her belly. This is your doing, Kelly. Part of the joy of that day when you came home early was the expectation of the joy when we told you that you were going to be a daddy. I had hoped the news would help get you on board as Mark and Mary had already agreed to be godparents. He burst out laughing. Do you really expect me to believe this new pile of horse crap you are shoving down my throat? You really believe that the news of you being pregnant possibly with my progeny, but more likely Mark's, would drive me so deliriously happy that I would immediately jump into your cesspool of shit? You are more delusional than I had ever dreamed. Missouri turned at the kitchen door. When your scumsucker child is born, we will get DNA testing done. If it happens to be mine, I will gladly pay the child support, but will not ask for any visitation or custody. As far as I am concerned, it is not my child and will never know me. It can call Mark Daddy-a. He then walked out the kitchen door. Megan ran to stop him, but was only in time to watch this man, her husband, almost a stranger, grab reins and mane and swing up on his horse and ride out of the ranch yard at a good lope. Missouri didn't bother to look back at her tear-stained face. Megan finally understood what she had done. Since she had discovered the pleasures of polyamory, her life had gotten worse instead of better. All her plans were for naught. Kelly wouldn't even acknowledge the baby growing in her womb. She had no husband. Her job was pretty tenuous since she had taken so much time off to search for him, and the sex with the Brooks was no longer all that satisfying. Both Mary and Mark seemed to be using her for their own pleasure and not really caring to see if she was satisfied. Megan slowly waddled back into the dining room where Connie was still sitting. She looked at the ranch wife. He really is my baby's father. Mark had a vasectomy years ago when he and Mary decided against any kids. There has been no one else since we became exclusive. Connie couldn't resist. It seems to me that you forgot the meaning of exclusive. Megan collapsed into the chair. I know. I really thought it would be good for us. For people loving each other fully and completely without jealousy and fully in tune with each other. Everything I read on the internet about it made it seem that this was the new way, the best way to go. The statistics say there is less cheating in a poly marriage and that most are very happy in that kind of relationship. Connie shook her head. Haven't you ever heard that you can't believe everything you find on the internet? Even us poor backwoods peckerheads know that. Most cultures did away with multiple wives or husbands many years ago, as it was not sustainable in the long term. I believe it is a very rare instance where this kind of relationship works and is not the norm. Trying to live with one person is hard enough. Trying to please multiple people is almost impossible. Megan started to cry softly. Finally, she achieved some kind of control and looked up at her hostess. Tell Kelly I am going home, but I will fight the divorce. His baby needs a father as well as a mother, and that is the only reason I will fight. She got up and joined her lovers, and they soon were out of sight. The dust had hardly settled when Missouri came back to the ranch house. Connie let him know what Megan had said. He just nodded. He really had hoped for her to just accept it, but knew down deep that she was not going to go quietly. Life went on. Kelly went back to his hometown in Missouri for the divorce hearing. Lawrence filed all the right motions. Megan countered just as she promised. She admitted her wrongdoing but told the judge that she had come to her senses and had ended her sexual relationship with the Brooks. They were still friends but no longer lovers. She asked for counseling. The judge took it all under advisement and set another court date in 2 weeks. During the wait, Kelly stayed with his parents. They were amazed at how much he had changed. They were also pleased at those changes, but were very disappointed in Megan's outrageous behavior. They had truly loved her like a daughter, but she was persona non grata for what she did to their son. During the wait, Megan went into labor and delivered a beautiful baby girl, whom she immediately named Kelly. DNA testing showed that she was the progeny of Kelly Free. Kelly's parents forgave Megan a little, so they could have a relationship with their granddaughter. Kelly visited the hospital before Kelly was released to go home. He didn't want to admit it, but she pulled on his heartstrings. If only Megan hadn't decided to screw the Brooks, they would be so happy to have little Kelly in their lives. Now he would be an absentee father. Megan made sure to take little Kelly over to the Frees to see her grandparents on almost a daily basis. Kelly made sure to avoid those visits. He would always leave right after Megan arrived. At the next hearing, the judge made his decision known. After contemplating all the evidence, as well as the briefs, I have decided that marital counseling will not do any good. Mr. Free, whom I hear is also known as Missouri, it looks like you have made a new life for yourself in Nebraska. I have read your official account, and also have looked into the claims made by others about you. If any of this is true, then you have abandoned Mrs. Free. He went on to set the judgment of 50% of assets to be provided to Megan by end of business the next week. He also set child support for Kelly. There would be no maintenance, more commonly known as alimony, as officially Kelly made less money than Megan. He also set visitation of the usual every Wednesday, every other weekend, and 6 weeks in the summer, even though Kelly had not requested any visitation. He admonished Megan to make sure that Kelly also had access to his daughter on at least half of the normal holidays each year. If Mr. Free comes back to this court with the complaint that you have not obeyed my directive and have made it difficult for him to see his daughter, I will not be pleased and will revisit custody. I am tired of bickering so-called adults who use children as weapons. Do you understand me? Megan stood and acknowledged the directive. Your Honor, I would prefer that this divorce not be granted and that my husband would come home to me and my daughter. Since he is the one who is demanding that our marriage be terminated, I will not deny him visitation in any way, just in case he should forgive me and want to become a family again. Kelly made no comment to the judge. With a smack of the gavel, it was done. Kelly and Megan were no longer married. He made sure that all his assets, including the assets that his lawyer had hidden for him, were split evenly so that little Kelly would not have any wants as long as her mother took care financially. Kelly left the next day for Nebraska. There was a difference, though, in his return. While at his parents', he had contacted some of his old clients. Most of them were very pleased to hear from him and were quite ready to use his new one-man consulting service to find new properties. Missouri was now in business for himself, but added a twist. He would take his horse, that he finally named Leroy, a gelding named after the horse in the big and rich song Save a Horse, Ride a Cowboy, to the likely spots that companies needed. He would spend a couple of weeks just riding the area to explore, even if it was in a populated area. He found he not only drew a lot of attention, but residents loved to talk to a man on horseback. In between trips, he was a ranch hand again. He reveled in the manual labor. It gave him time to think and plan as it kept his hands busy. Over the winter, when the daily chores became less pressing, other than feeding the livestock, he could visit with his family via the internet. He had helped Bill put in a cell phone booster also so video visits were easier. He was getting to know his daughter as she was at his parents' almost every time he called. There was also a local buzz about strangers coming to Hyannis looking for the legend called Missouri. It didn't take long for an out-of-state SUV to show up at the Circle Bar X. At least the occupants didn't alight from the vehicle with their noses in the air and try to talk condescendingly to the Blazes as they introduced themselves. The man and woman were agents for a cable network that specialized in cheating spouse movies, and the internet buzz about Missouri had piqued their interest. By the time they left that afternoon, promises had been made to preserve Missouri's anonymity by changing names, dates, and locations enough that only those truly in the know would recognize who the story was about. The working title was The Man from Missouri, but Missouri's hometown would be changed. Missouri also had the agents contact Megan for her input and consent, even though it wasn't really needed as the story would be fictionalized. Butch was promoted to be the Tinseltown liaison. Missouri had come to find out that the quiet man had a degree in communications and had friends who were lawyers. Between Butch and Lawrence Roberts, Missouri soon had a public relations person and an entertainment lawyer on board. Very quickly, a corporation was formed in Missouri was now a CEO with Bill and Connie on his board of directors, and all of the staff on the Circle Bar X were shareholders. The next change came when Megan contacted Missouri about a job. Kelly, I need you to be more than a face on a screen for your daughter. After the movie people contacted me, I realized that I don't necessarily want to live here in Missouri any longer. Your parents and I have talked. We would all like to relocate. Is there somewhere close to the ranch that we can move to, so we can all see more of you? I do need to have something to do. Is there any employment opportunities close, also? Kelly was almost flabbergasted. A new wrinkle in his life he had not anticipated, and it wasn't such a bad one. As a matter of fact, Megan, I need someone to help Butch with this movie deal. I think you might just be the one to help. Let me get back to you. He got off the phone with Megan and called his parents to confirm the news. Ideas were kicked around, some discarded, but others were thoughtfully expanded until a working plan was in place. Kelly then went to the village board in Hyannis and presented his idea to build a couple of very nice houses there on the edge of town. Now, someone from a larger community might wonder why the village would need to contemplate a few extra houses since the infrastructure can usually handle that increase, but in a village, new houses were a stress on a small system and had to be carefully considered. Luckily, the village could handle the increase and the new construction was approved. Megan started her move immediately. Kelly found a small but livable mobile home for her. She and Kelly were soon ensconced in their new digs. Baby Kelly was soon called Miss Missouri in honor of her father. One of the writers for the movie also showed up in an RV and parked at the campground, and the movie immediately was expanded to include these new developments. Before long, The Man from Missouri was expanded into parts. The first movie would be the original story of cheating and healing. The second part would be the divorce and the redemption. The writer was going to take creative license to get the couple back together. That part might end up on another cable network that specialized in love stories. The writer was also exploring how to incorporate some of the legendary events that were attributed to Missouri in between the first and second parts, just to keep the interest going. Hell, some were advocating an episodic series instead of just a couple of movies. But what about Missouri's love life, you might ask? No, he and Megan were done. They became friends as well as parents to Miss Missouri, but that was all. But Missouri was not destined to be alone. While high-end modular homes were being planned, built, and then brought to the Sandhills for Megan and Missouri's parents, someone new showed up in the ranch yard. A van drove in one day. Missouri just happened to be in the bunkhouse when the passenger alighted. The pretty woman, using crutches to get around, introduced herself as Jane Gantry, and she was there to thank her lifesaver. Her driver was Pretty Casey, the paramedic from the helicopter. Missouri usually tried to avoid his fans, but this time he decided to sit and talk with the two women. Jane gushed to Bill and Connie about what a man Missouri was. Casey chimed in, constantly stating the same thing. Bill and Connie agreed with the women and grinned at Missouri's discomfort. Finally, Connie asked about Jane's injuries. Well, the impact broke multiple vertebrae in my spine, so it has been a long haul getting back on my feet. I was in a wheelchair for months while undergoing physical therapy. I am slowly healing and hope to be free of these crutches soon. At the same time, I finished my advanced practice nursing license. I cannot fly anymore, and so I am looking for a place to start a clinic. Do you think Hyannis could use some health care? Casey then chimed in. I am working on my RN and want to help Jane. I have PTSD now from the crash and have been working on a ground transfer ambulance while getting my license. This initial meeting set up additional meetings to flesh out plans. Surveys needed to be completed about any need of additional medical care in the small community. A building had to be either located or built that would house a clinic. Over the next few months, Missouri was so busy with helping at the ranch, moving his parents, getting to know his daughter, try to rein in the outrageous stories being proposed for the movie, plan a clinic, and then even make a few site visits for clients that he was running himself into the ground. Jane stepped in and made Missouri take a break. She had improved to where she didn't need the crutches any longer, but still couldn't stand for extended periods. As she had improved, their meetings had changed from just business to a more personal status. She was a good-looking 35-year-old who had been burned by a bad lover in college and had stayed away from men since then. Casey had also had her troubles with men, and that was why she had turned away from the male species until the crash. Missouri, with his sudden appearance at the crash site, take command attitude, quick assessment, and then implementation of their rescue, had become her hero, and she worshipped him. The two had semi-seriously set their caps for him. They had long conversations about him. Jane was the first to change from a hero worship to an appreciation of him as a man, a friend, confidant, and maybe as a lover. Casey was wise enough to just warn her friend that she had better never hurt the man or hell would be unleashed on Jane. Not unlike the notoriety heaped on Megan's head, Jane convinced Missouri that it was time to get away for a short while. It was now early summer again. The frost was out of the ground. The hills were green and lush. Branding was over, and it would be a few weeks before haying got started. This time she invited herself along ostensibly as his caregiver. She had not ridden very much in her life, so she got a quick lesson in horseback riding. Missouri was reluctant to take her, but after everyone, including Megan and his parents, told him that his days of traveling alone were over, allowed that having a companion would not be a bad idea. During that week of just riding and camping without leaving the Circle Bar X, they had their phones turned off and became more than friends or caregiver and care receiver. They became intimate and were engaged when they returned. Megan knew when the couple left for the week that she was now completely out of Missouri's life, except as co-worker and co-parent. She then gave in and started to see Butch as her next and, hopefully, last love. Over time, Miss Missouri was joined by two half-brothers by way of her dad, the legendary man from Missouri and Jane, and two half-sisters by her mother and Butch. She was a great and precocious big sister and friend to all. Bill and Connie were treated as grandparents to the clan. The movie was a success, and the only credit to the original story was a small blurb on the screen stating it was based on the life of Kelly Free that came and went so fast in the credits that few even noticed it. It spawned a couple more movies, including one about how redemption and renewal occurred. That last one was a tearjerker. Kelly Free invested in the Circle Bar X, and the relationship he had with Bill and Connie remained strong until they passed away on their home range at very advanced ages. Arrangements made with the APR and Jane Free assured that a medical helicopter was available anytime they needed a quick ride to the hospital, so they never felt the need to move. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.